Call to order the September 9th, 2021 meeting of the North Andover Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This meeting of the North Andover Planning Board will be conducted both in person at the meeting location, which is at Town Hall, and via remote participation. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting live may do so on their televisions by tuning into Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 26, or online at www.northandovercam.org. In-person attendance of members of the public and board members will be permitted, and every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceeding as soon as possible after the meeting. If the public would like to participate in public hearings but not attend the meeting in person, please email your question or comment prior to or during the meeting to Jean Enright at JENRIGHT@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be read during the proceeding and responded to accordingly. Okay, so tonight's agenda includes we're going to have discussion on the inclusionary housing bylaw with some guests giving us some information and guidance. Then we're going to get a short watershed plan update. I think Dan is here for that. And then we're going to talk about Royal Crest. We'll look at a revised program summary showing how the plans have changed over time, as well as what our current plans are. We're going to get some information about the currently proposed heights, as well as some diagrams and some perspectives from abutting properties. At the end of that, I'd like to kind of poll the board as to where each individual is at in terms of, your comfort level with moving the proposal forward. So we'll talk about that once we get into Royal Crest. So, inclusionary housing bylaw.
Take a roll call attendance.
Oh, sure. Why don't we do that?
So Kelly Cormier,
Here.
Peter Boynton,
Here.
Alyssa Koenig. Here. John Simons.
Here.
Eitan Goldberg.
I'm here. Okay, inclusionary housing bylaw.
As I indicated at our last meeting, we've invited Chris Kluckman, Deputy Director of Community Services Division at DHCD, and Katie Lacey, who's a Senior Planner at Mass Housing Partnership, to discuss baseline housing choice best practices, lessons learned from a statewide inclusionary zoning survey, key findings from the survey, and how units qualify to count on the subsidized housing inventory. Dan Beckley is also in attendance. Dan will begin tonight's presentation discussing the 2020 census data, North Andover's housing initiatives, and an explanation of what inclusionary zoning is. We'll wrap up the presentation with some key takeaways and open it up for questions. So Dan, if you'd like to get started.
Sure thing. Pulling this together. All right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So as Jean said, we're going to go over some contextual housing data in North Andover, and then Chris and Katie are going to talk a little bit more about inclusionary zoning. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. So as most of you know, I think probably pretty well, North Andover is growing and has been growing fairly rapidly for decades. So this graph shows housing growth in number of units over time. And North Andover has done really well in, meeting the population growth demand with housing. And that shows in what is our current subsidized housing inventory is 8.7%. That's up from just 7% in 2010. However, that is calculated with the 2010 10 census housing units. So our current subsidized housing inventory does not reflect the current actual number of housing units in North Andover. When the 2020 census numbers come in and become part of that calculation, we will be down to 8%, which certainly isn't bad. We're still above the 7% we were at. So of the 950 units that we added during that time, 256 were subsidized housing inventory qualified units. So over a quarter of the units over that time period were added to the inventory, which is pretty significant. And basically, it has, to some extent, depended on outside forces. Like 196 of those units came from berry farms. And so to attain 10% in a reasonable time, more action be taken at a local level to kind of consider how we can meet this demand and how we can reach 10%.
Dan, I'm sorry, just a quick question. Is subsidized on that slide the same as affordable?
So the subsidized housing inventory
I can't hear him. I don't know if anyone else
situation of, I think, berry farms, because a certain percent of the complex has affordable housing restrictions, all the units count towards our inventory. So we actually have, I think, have fewer affordable units than what is the actual percentage. I may not be.
Can I clarify?
Yep.
So,
Go ahead.
Kelly, so when you say it's like, kind of think of it like affordable with a capital A versus a lowercase a. So the SHI is towards our like 40B count, but not all of them necessarily are actually affordable restricted. If you have a certain percentage of, when you do a 40B project, you have 100 houses, a certain percentage of those actually have to be with those affordable restrictions, but the town gets credit for the full amount. So it's loosely your affordable number, but it's not exact. It's more just for our 40B calculation.
Okay.
I'd like to come back to that a little bit later, maybe when the representatives from the state talk about that, because I think there's some nuances in the way we count affordability that are completely unfair to this town, so.
They are certainly more knowledgeable about that than I am, so I'll leave that discussion till later. So getting into what North Andover has been and is doing to support taking action, the town has performed substantial long-term planning and work with local bodies to support affordable housing. So we have the 2018 housing production plan, which I believe was completed in 2018, the 2018 master plan, and those both highlight, planning that's taken place and provided recommendations that sort of should be informing what is this town's housing strategy. And inclusionary zoning is recommended in both of those plans. Among other strategies, we have bodies in town that are working and directly with affordable housing and have directly funded affordable housing, such as our Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Community Preservation Committee, which at the very least each year provides $100,000 to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but has done other things like worked with on the Stevens Corner project. There's a affordable housing consultant that's been hired with the most recent funding round from CPC. And essentially part of considering a toolkit of sort of housing strategies. We've also broached the discussion of accessory dwelling units here before, another option that, is not going to stand on its own to produce a substantial amount of affordable housing, but does diversify the housing stock. Similarly, the planning department is sort of gearing up to do a review of downtown zoning, and we may find ways to better generate a variety of housing, but again, it's not going to provide those affordable units that we are looking for. So I guess moving on a little bit, thinking about what is inclusionary zoning, I think you all know fairly well at this point, but it's a zoning tool that requires that developments meeting certain standards that are set by the town to provide a certain percentage of affordable units. Like any other zoning tool, this is a strategy that sets conditions of applicability, performance standards, and may encourage desirable behaviors or offer alternatives to compliance. So applicability, some towns look at targeting geographic areas, the project size, the type of development. Requirements, we set 15% affordable. You can also set income requirements, like some towns specifically focus on very low income, whereas ours covers a more broad low to moderate income. We've discussed incentives like a density bonus and alternatives such as fee and lieu. And so really, these are things that are included in a lot of zoning, but what stands out about inclusionary zoning is maybe the proactiveness, that you are sort of putting this in place, anticipating the future growth and determining how you want the town to grow. So you're thinking about the future when putting inclusionary zoning into place and how you want to regulate developments that are not happening yet. And so considering how inclusionary zoning fits into this toolkit, Chris from DHCD will discuss best practices in housing and outlining where we stand as a town in what practices we've adopted. So Chris, I'll hand it over to you and just let me know when I should go to the next slide.
Thank you so much. And to all of you in North Andover and on remote, hello and greetings. I wish we were there in person. I really miss going around the Commonwealth because I did a lot of that for the past 4 years. For the past 4 years, I've been running the Housing Choice Initiative, which is the Baker Polito's one of the initiatives to try and encourage and reward communities that are building housing. But when so my job, I think about, so here I've labeled this slide, does your community have the housing stock to accommodate change in needs? But really what my job is, does the Commonwealth have this? And I like to just bring pictures to remind us that housing, now Dan's done a wonderful job with the data and the charts, and all of that is very important. But I want to remind everybody when we're talking about housing, we're talking about neighbors, and we're talking about people. And we're talking about people with different needs. We have, the super elderly. We have great medical care in this area, and the lovely woman in the red blouse here is my mom. She lived with us, with my family, for the last 10 years of her life, and she died at 94. And she had really specific housing needs. And so an accessory dwelling unit or, a house large enough to accommodate that kind of family worked for our family. In the lower left corner is my son, who's now 20 and 6 foot and 200 pounds. But back when he was in elementary school in the town where I lived, his teacher could not come close to affording to be able to live in the town in which she taught students. And so this is just some examples of the kinds of people that we're planning for when we talk about how do we plan and how do we have housing options for everybody in our community. Next slide, Dan. So as part of the Housing Choice Initiative, so North Andover is a housing choice community, and so congratulations on that. That means that you've been producing a certain amount of housing over the last 5 years. And we also talk about best practices. And so these best practices are how you can qualify to be a housing choice community. And I offer, for housing choice communities, there are 78 right now in the state. And there's an exclusive grant program open for housing choice communities. And we look at these best practices when we evaluate grant applications. So the more best practices you have, the better your community will score on our grant applications. And so these are kind of what I would call the baseline. And the message here is not that I'm going to tell you what you guys need to have. It's just to remind you that there are many different ways that you can promote housing and a range of housing options for people in your community. And it's kind of like putting puzzle pieces together. To have a really complete housing, kind of program, you really need to put many, many different kinds of puzzle pieces together. And it's not just regulation. inclusionary zoning, which we're talking about this evening, is very important, but there are other kinds of mechanisms that you can use to promote a range of housing options for your community. So as Dan said, the first slide here is showing the housing choice best practices that you guys do have. You have multifamily by right, which means you have a place in your community where somebody can come in and build multifamily development without a special permit. You have mixed use or open space residential development. You have, as he just mentioned, you have an affordable housing trust, and you're using CPA funds to support housing research or actual potentially housing construction. And you have a certified housing production plan, which means that you have grown your affordable housing once you had a housing production plan, and you've grown to a certain amount. So all of those are all, and frankly, there are probably about 10 or 12 communities in Massachusetts that have certified housing production plans. So way to go, North Andover. That's awesome. So this is a great starting point. And Dan, let's go to the next slide. And so we can talk about some of the other best practices that we promote. Again, not to tell you that you have to do all of these, but these are the menu of options that you have. And right up at the top is inclusionary zoning, where you have density increases to encourage people to get a benefit if they're doing something like affordable housing. Having a 40R or smart growth district is another best practice. Allowing accessory dwelling units by right, or making sure that you're not unreasonably denying them, that if you have a pattern of approving them, and I was a community development director for 7 years in another community, and I now understand that accessory dwelling units sometimes need a meeting or a site plan review to make sure neighbors are comfortable with if any additions are going on. Reducing your parking requirements. I know you're not in the regional plan, you're in the Merrimack Valley Regional Planning Agency, but the Regional Planning Agency to the south, the MAPC, which is the Greater Boston Area Regional Planning Agency, did a study about multifamily housing developments in their region, which is 101 cities and towns. And they found that most multifamily parking spaces were not being used. So developments and parking bylaws are requiring a certain amount of a certain amount of parking, but when they actually looked at utilization, they found that they're not actually being used. And so there's some real hard evidence. And if you want that, if you're interested in that, you can go look at the MAPC parking study. I think it's called Perfect Fit Parking. We also promote education for your land use boards. The Citizen Planner Training Collaborative, the agency that Katie works for, Massachusetts Housing Partnership, they have an annual conference called the Housing Institute. There are lots of different ways that you can inform yourself about how to make sure that you're understanding state law and the framework within which you work. Let's go to the next slide. And then these other best practices, some of them fit for you and some of them don't. The Housing Development Incentive Program and Urban Renewal and DIF, which is a certain kind of financing, may work better in more urban communities. But we also recognize, obviously, if you're over 10% of your subsidized housing inventory, that's a best practice. But we're also recognizing that if you've been increasing that percentage of subsidized housing inventory in the last 5 years, that you're making progress towards it. And so we recognize that as a best practice. We want to see everybody moving forward, understanding that you may not meet that 10%, but we want to see some progress. And then there's the Community Compact Program, which is an initiative of the Lieutenant Governors, and they offer technical assistance and some funding to pursue best practices in a whole range of topics, but housing is one of those topics. And so I'm just going to stop there and let Katie tell you a little bit more about her work on inclusionary zoning, and I think we'll be happy to answer questions at the end.
Hi, my name's Katie Lacey. I'm with the Community Assistance Team at Mass Housing Partnership. And we're going to go through this really quick and then just be here as a resource if you guys have more questions. We got the opportunity, we were contracted by Grounded Solutions Network, which is a national organization, to do the Massachusetts part of a national survey of inclusionary zoning. And it was an exhaustive and exhausting survey, but it gave us a lot of insights on it. So we also end up providing technical assistance to cities and towns. And one of the main things we're asked about is inclusionary zoning. So just a quick, so these findings, this project wrapped up in 2019, and you might be interested to know. We've had inclusionary zoning here since the 70s. We were actually the first in the United States in Newton. Almost half of Massachusetts municipalities have something on the books. So it can come in a variety of flavors. It's not always something in your bylaw called inclusionary zoning bylaw. Sometimes it's like an overlay that requires inclusionary units. And it was self-defined by the municipality. So these numbers may be a little funky. For instance, 40R, some communities said, yeah, we have 40R, that's an inclusionary zoning bylaw. Others did not count that. So there's a little squishiness to the numbers. But it's been a decent producer of affordable units, 11,000 units as of the end of 2019. And I believe that's significantly higher today. On the other hand, more than half of these 11,000 units are in 3 communities: Watertown, Cambridge, and Boston. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. One of the big ones being who's had it on their books longer. Watertown has been doing this since the 80s, which is very unusual. And the good news is basically that what we found is it's not just the Watertowns, Cambridge, and Boston. There are some mid and small sized communities that have very effective inclusionary zoning bylaws: North Reading, Salisbury, and Westwood. The bad news is that 60% of municipalities haven't created a single unit. So they have something on the books. They may even get counted as a best practice, but nothing's happened. I've learned from your planning folks that you have a bunch of projects, Princeton Properties, Avalon Bay, and Minco, that if your inclusionary zoning had been in place, you would have had 74 more units under that inclusionary zoning bylaw. So you would have had a pretty darn effective one. Next slide, please. But in summary, these are the lessons we learned. And I've had the opportunity to take a look at the draft you guys have. It looks really solid. I know that's your discussion to have, not mine. But basically, inclusionary zoning is most effective in high growth communities. So basically, if stuff's not getting built, affordable units aren't being created. So if you have a town like Petersham out in Western Mass that has an inclusionary zoning bylaw, it's really not a surprise that they're not creating lots of affordable units. They're creating relationally to the amount of building that's going on there. You and Andover have a lot going on, so you could really capture that. It's most effective when it's tailored to local conditions. People like to borrow their neighboring town's bylaw, but some communities have sewer, some don't. Some have single acre zoning, some have, it's really different. It's most effective when it's tailored to local conditions, updated in response to local conditions, and left in place for a long time, which is something you can affect. It basically only works for a developer when it's feasible for a community, if it's feasible for the developer. So we get a lot of well-meaning communities that are like, wait a sec, why are we only asking for 10% affordable? We should be asking for 50% affordable, 30% affordable. And what happens is it just doesn't pencil out given the cost of development in Massachusetts. And so in summary, it's a really useful tool. Every affordable unit you create houses an eligible household that needs a home. It's not going to stop 40B. It definitely helps you keep in place. It's one of many tools that you need. And, I'm a big fan. I think there's one more slide. Oh, this is a change in topic, but basically, just, and this could probably be for questions later, inclusionary units, if you have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, if we sort of jump to the end, okay, we have this unit. Wait a sec, how is that affordable? How does that get on the subsidized housing inventory? In order for them to be to count on the SHI, they go through the local initiative program, which is a program run by DHCD, Chris's organization, different folks there, as local action units. So someone at the state level, if a project gets approved through your bylaw, is actually reviewing the project, making sure that there's income and asset limits, a deed restriction or affordability restriction in place, local preference, should you guys choose that, and ongoing monitoring requirements. So it's really not necessary for each individual municipality to figure out how to do all these things. In fact, it's really not left to the discretion of the municipality. The state says if you want them to count, it has to be done this way. And DHCD is technically the monitoring agent for these units, but the town usually would have some support from a local entity as well. So that's really all I got. I'm sure I'm going to raise more questions than I answered, but we're trying to keep this short because you guys have a long night ahead.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Jean for key takeaways, unless she wants me to take that.
It's fine, Dan, so I have it.
Great.
So obviously, those three different perspectives there, three different kind of experts on different data points, but the takeaways are North Andover is growing and it requires tools for sustainable growth. Adopting inclusionary zoning is a master plan and a housing production plan goal, both of which were developed with considerable community input. A majority of the region has inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is one tool in a larger housing strategy and demonstrates that the town's commitment, so this is to provide.
I'm not sure what happened there.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but
Sorry.
to provide various housing options for people who want to live in North Andover. The projected 2020 population was 29,851. The projection for 2035 is 30,275, but I think as you saw on the census data, the actual 2020 population is 30,915. So we've already surpassed what was projected for 2035. That being said, we'd open it up to questions. John, I know you have a few, and we have contact information here, so if you do have follow-up questions after tonight, we'll be happy to facilitate trying to get some answers.
So, and I have some questions. We can go with just everyone individually who has questions. So why don't we start with the people here, and then we'll go to the people on remote, and then I'll go last just to clean up. John?
My first question, and it's meant to be a little bit provocative, but what is the empirical evidence that this works, that it has the exact effect that you want it to have? Is there any research on it? I mean, just to give you an example, and it's not sort of, all a direct argument, but there was the comment about Newton being the first town in the state to have inclusionary zoning. Well, if there's any community in the state that's not affordable, it's Newton. So, I mean, so kind of at one level it doesn't pass the sniff test. But, I mean, more seriously, how does inclusionary zoning drive down the average price for people to live in? Is there any empirical evidence that that is true?
I don't think there is empirical evidence that that is true. What is, I think the intent is to create units that are priced lower than market rate housing that are eligible to households earning less than average median income. And it does do that.
And I'll say, John, that comment is often made even in our town. So we have the market rate price to live at Ferry Farm, and we have the affordable price. And people would say, well, the affordable price isn't affordable to me. So it's relative, I think. It's
Well, but my point is, what's the end game here? What do people really want to do? Because I think with a lot of these things with housing policy, we package all our hopes and desires into this mix of things that simultaneously all can't be true. That's part of the problem, and I think there's a certain amount of irrationality and conflict in all the things we're doing. I mean, it seems to me that you can make a very strong argument that, okay, if you have inclusionary zoning, what that does is and that means that a certain number of units are less than the market rate. That means it's effectively a tax to the developer. So the developer either has to raise the prices of the other units, or maybe they forgo doing the project altogether. And so I'm not convinced that on that, other than the people who benefit, whose good fortune to get these units, the community as a whole is better off. I mean, that's my point. And again, I'm being a little bit devil's advocate here, but it seemed to me that it's obvious economics that would be the case. That it rises up the price point for market rate housing and makes that less affordable for people.
I think if I might reflect, Katie's slides talked about the importance of having it be locally tailored. And so you should also be talking to the developers in your community to make sure that it works for them, that your percentage of number of units is not too high, that the trigger, the number of units that would trigger inclusionary zoning is not too high, or is not too low, I'm sorry. And so it is very important for that to be right. What will happen is that these are units that will be restricted in perpetuity and monitored over time so that people at lower income brackets can live there and will live there in perpetuity. Not the same people. I mean, the units can turn over, but an affordable family will move in if somebody else moves out. Or if their income rises and they move out, then an affordable unit becomes available again. So again, it as Katie said, it in and of itself will not solve, and I think I said the same thing, this is one piece of the puzzle, but it is something that when it does work and when it's tailored well, that it really can work. And again, I think we would both say to recommend to get some feedback from the development community in your town who know the land values and know what they need to make, and they should give you some pretty honest feedback.
And I'll just add to that, we know the population that qualify for this income level are our teachers, they are our firemen, they are our policemen that are all starting out. So there is a population that meets the income level that we're targeting. And as far as the developers, I have sent it to Trinity, I've sent it to Avalon Bay, I've sent it to Minco. Minco hasn't responded yet, but said they would. And the initial feedback from both Trinity and Avalon Bay was not relative to the percentage. It was more of a legal nature than either the trigger of how many units being 8 or more or the 15% requirement.
So what I would say is, I think it's a really good point to talk about. It's more, I think one of the things is how are we viewing the success of an inclusionary zoning? Like, what is actually what are we looking to gain from it? So I think you're right. It's not lowering the prices of the market, right? What it is creating more housing choice. So it means that there's a scarcity of not necessarily affordable, but of with the lowercase, but of units at this particular price point that people have access to, that they know they will have access to over time, because the market, at least the last couple of years, has been insane. And it's been, let's say over the last 10 years, it's been growing and growing and growing. Everything's getting more expensive. So finding these lower income places that you can keep at that just gives more of a variety of options in town. And I think that's what the inclusionary zoning does. Plus it helps you with your 40B 10%. So I think those are the two benefits. I don't think it drives down the price. I don't think it drives it up that much either, because
No, but what it will do at the margin, it will reduce the amount of housing in aggregate that is created. It has to.
but the unit,
Unless you increase the density so much to make it affordable to accommodate for the lower prices.
well, but the only, not the only, most of the places that we could see for our particular bylaw of it applying would be multifamily housing, right? And probably on a significant level, these 100 unit, 150 unit, 200 units. I think the idea is that, one, if you raise the prices of some of those units a slight amount, you're going to make up for your, you know, your percentages. But two, I mean, if that means that the developers make a little bit less on that project where everybody's doing it, I think that's just going to become the new kind of price of doing business, as long as it's consistent with everywhere else in the region, and then you're getting that benefit as well, that of having these different housing choices.
Yeah, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but I'd like to ask one other question that's a slight tangent, but I think it ties back, is that only a certain category of housing gets counted in the affordable count. It has to meet certain criteria. But ultimately, it is based on income.
Yeah.
Right. North Andover has hundreds of units that are affordable by the economic test, but don't count as affordable under the state law, which I think is extraordinarily unfair. And we have built high-density, multifamily housing at a market rate with zero subsidies that clearly have a cost point that people could afford, but they don't count in our stock. And I guess I'd ask that to the representative of the state. Why is that?
So you're talking a small A affordable.
The small A affordable, yeah, is that clearly meets the income criteria, but don't count because they weren't actually.
No, because they're not restricted. Right, so.
Well, they're not restricted, but they also got no subsidies.
No, I know, I
mean,
understand,
yeah.
but I'm saying, if, it's a really good point, right? If something costs $1,000 a month and that's affordable, why shouldn't that count towards your housing? You have affordable housing in town.
Yeah.
But I think, and they can answer probably better, it's, these units all have actual affordable restrictions that run with them that mean going forward, right? So if I charge $1,000 a month for rent, at any point I can say, you know what, I'm going to charge $2,000 or $2,500,
No,
or I'm going to sell
and
it.
that's fine, but then take it off the affordable count then. I think communities, I mean, the experience that I've had with some of the affordable housing in town that is built as a deep dark secret is it's extremely expensive to build, and there's enormous subsidies going to people, and that counts as affordable. And here you got somebody that can build the same unit for far less money, and it doesn't count as affordable. It's just not fair.
So I'm afraid my answer is a little bit bureaucratic. Chapter 40B is the law. The regulations have been established. The regulations require a project to have a subsidy, have a public subsidy, and they require them to be deed restricted. So the chair is correct. The deed restriction is kind of the big thing, but it does require this public subsidy, and that is the way the law is. So as an agency that implements the law, we have to follow the law.
And I think a lot's probably bureaucratic.
All Wendell Homes, the law is, okay.
Well, I mean, again, I think think about it from a management perspective. Like every time an apartment changes hands or changes rents, do you have to do those calculations? If you're not as part of the system,
Yeah.
It's hard. It doesn't seem fair though. There should be some way of even giving an average or giving a percentage or somehow giving a bonus to a town when you know those things exist.
Well, that is ultimately my point, is that you basically tell developers they can't be super creative on their own, and the only way that something counts in the affordable housing count is if it gets subsidized, and probably ends up being more expensive to build, so.
Maybe our state rep is watching and we can talk with her about it.
I will just interject that there are, your point is excellent. I mean, I live in a town with a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing, and it doesn't count. On the other hand, I've seen quite a bit of it converted into McMansions and tear downs and be rebuilt. And so it gives it sort of that long-term protection that you'll always have that. But the second point is that, there are communities that are use CPA funds and stuff to do buy down programs that take that naturally occurring affordable unit and put the deed restriction on it in cooperation with the owner. And then it is a permanently affordable unit. So you make a good point. I would agree with you, but we're probably not going to solve that here.
I think I just wanted to add one more thing is because you have a housing production plan, that, when you do a housing production plan, you look at not just the subsidized units, you look at your entire housing inventory and you try and get a sense of where it is on the market. And it's a pretty basic planning process. You're identifying gaps in, what is your affordability gap? What is the average income of people in your town? Is that, the community, are you providing housing for all levels of income? And so that is that housing production plan. If you don't remember it, because at some point you guys approved it, it does provide a lot of information about the housing in your town, even though it's not on the subsidized housing inventory.
So I have a tangential question. So we saw as part of the data from the census that we were at 8.7%. Now it looks like we're going to be at 8% in terms of our housing units. So we all know that 10% is kind of this magic number under the law. But kind of going off of John's point, what's an actual percentage that, like, as a best practice, we should be looking for, right? So we know we want to get to 10% for certain benefits that it gives the town, but what kind of percentage of affordable housing is best for a town in terms of its growth? And I mean, yeah, I guess that's the question. I mean, should we be looking to get 10%, 11%, 12, 15? I mean, what's a appropriate number?
Well, as you guys acknowledged in your earlier conversation, the subsidized housing inventory of 10% does not mean that 10% of the units in your community are actually affordable or deed restricted. Rental projects, if 20 or 25% of the units are affordable, the entire project counts, and it's a mixed income project. 80% of that project, for example, or 75% of that project is market rate, but it is showing up as counting as affordable. That's a policy choice, and that's part of the 40B regulations. However, again, I would kind of go back to the housing production plan, where you're looking at what are the incomes in your community, who is having housing scarcity, what is the affordability gap is one of the data points in a housing production plan. And then you can try and strategize with the, what policies or what mechanisms do you want to put into place to gear for the individuals that are having real trouble finding housing. Again, Dan talked earlier about, there's very low income, moderately low income, there's a whole range. The very low income folks are the kinds of folks who qualify for public housing, but there's a whole range, and that's generally people who are making less than 30% of the area median income. But then there's a whole range of people who make half of the area median income, or between 60 and 80% of the area median income. So that local study and understanding of who's in your community helps you to understand what kind of housing policies you need and what income levels you should be targeting. And
of the best practices that we talked about, I mean, it seems like they all kind of do different things. The ADU kind of creates different housing choices. The inclusionary zoning kind of gives you percentages towards your SHI. Are there any that you think give you the most kind of actual affordable housing, or is it just, I mean, a lot of them seem to kind of hit different niches, but not really, for the most part, provide that much in actual terms of actual numbers of housing. Is there any that give you kind of the most bang for your bylaw?
Bylaws are only one piece of it, and inclusionary zoning bylaws can be very effective. I think the number, to talk about 74 units, and I don't know what time frame those three projects came in, but that, if your bylaw had been adopted, let's say 4 years ago, that you could have an additional 74 units on your SHI, that's a pretty big number. The other kinds of one of the biggest things that you can do as a community is donate municipally owned land to a developer who's then going to build affordable housing, because land costs are so expensive. And so looking at, or looking to use CPA funds to purchase a property that comes up for sale and then use it for housing. So taking away the land cost is a big way to promote affordable housing, in my opinion.
So to follow up on the 74 units, those are the actual affordable out of those three developments, but it would have gained us 498 units on our list. It would have had us far exceed the 10%. So
well, only if 25% of them had counted,
Right.
had been truly affordable.
Right, but I
It
believe,
had, it would have to be that amount for the whole thing to count.
I'm just saying, if we had inclusionary zoning at that time, and they came, that we'd be getting 15%, you're right, but you're right.
Yeah.
All the units wouldn't count unless it was a 40B.
Yeah.
But so the
Sorry.
point is well taken. But I mean, I just think that I think that last point, or just 2 points ago, that bylaws will get us something, but I don't want to sell this as this is going to solve our affordable housing.
There's no one silver bullet. There's a mix of tools that can be used.
But even I guess my point even more is that even if we take all these tools and all these bylaws, there are really two ways that we're going to get more affordable housing. One, if, as stated, if the town actually steps up and uses CPA funds or buys land or things like that, or public partnerships with actually building it, or developers choose to do it. I mean, there's only so much we can do with the bylaw. Doesn't mean we shouldn't. And I guess my last question is, are there any downsides that you guys see of our bylaw? It seems pretty tailored to the community, pretty in line with what other towns around us are doing. I don't see that it would have much of a impact on developers wanting to develop here. So do you see any particular downsides to this bylaw, or ones you've seen in the past that have had negative effects?
I had the opportunity to work with Jean, and we did iron out a few kinks in it. One of them being that it not apply to subdivisions, which is actually legally questionable. So single family subdivisions. I think it's solid. I think 15% for single family home developments can be a little high, but not for multifamily. And I would solve that problem, as Chris advised, by simply talking to a few developers. Seeing would that break the bank or not. To me, the bylaw looked good.
I have a question. So you noted that 60% of municipalities with inclusionary zoning have not created a single unit. Are these not being triggered by developers, or are they opting for a fee in lieu, or is there some other loophole maybe in their?
It's because nothing's getting built there.
In 60% of them?
Western Mass.
We've got a big state. I mean, if you go, all of, many little towns in Western Mass opted to adopt inclusionary zoning bylaw. They have a growth rate of maybe 8 units a year. Their bylaw starts at projects 7 units and bigger, so nothing has qualified.
So it's just not being triggered is what you're finding.
Exactly. I mean, there's 352 municipalities in Massachusetts. Exactly. It's not being one. Thank you, Chris. It's just simply not getting triggered. And the other thing is, there's many communities where, unfortunately, like in Somerville, for years they had the cutoff it was 5-unit projects or 6 or 7 unit projects, and suddenly a slew of 5-unit projects were coming in. Developers are smart, so there's ways around this, but the biggest issue is simply that the production is not happening.
Present company exclusion.
And that's what I'm wondering is how often are developers finding a way around this, or finding a loophole, or opting for one of the other options instead of building the housing?
How often?
Yeah.
I don't have, data on that. To be very honest, too, like Chris, I was a planning director for 13 years in a community. I was originally against the payment in lieu thing, but I have come full circle on that because it used to be that money just went into a town's general fund and was sloshed around in there. Now there's a tool that it can, you can direct it to your affordable housing trust. I can't remember. I think North Andover has an affordable housing trust. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So then when they have money, honestly, affordable housing trust is in a much better position to use that money super effectively in some of the ways that Chris described, supporting a town supported project on town-owned land, efforts that would result in really meaningful affordable housing. So I don't know the answer, but I think it's perfectly fine if they do the payment in lieu. Particularly in North Andover, you're a pretty sophisticated town with a trust and good planning staff, and it's not a bad thing.
Kelly?
So my questions were around the in lieu of, so I'm kind of processing what you're saying now, because I wasn't, from what I had heard and read, I wasn't feeling very positive about the in lieu of. It sort of felt like a way to avoid having to do them, but hearing what you're saying with our our housing trust that allows that the payment in lieu kind of gives us more power or more abilities to build those affordable units, or to have them. You just talked about that, so I'm kind of churning through it right now, and potentially changing my opinion on it, or educating me on it rather.
That's fast. It took me like 5 years.
I'm trying to check your time. You know, you're the expert, so I'm kind of just taking that and churning through on it.
Yeah.
Because my
And
thought,
just Kelly, just to weigh in, I've never had any doubts about fee in lieu. I think it's a great idea. Sometimes a project just cannot physically, because every site, as you guys all know, every site's a little different. Sometimes you just can't physically do something, or there's some other reason. And so the fee in lieu, and then you can, you don't have to rely so much on CPA monies if you want to. Maybe you need a sewer line extension to a site that the town owns. It's an old fire station that you're going to redevelop with housing, or something, and then you just have more money in the bank to enable you to do that, or to leverage additional development.
I think my concerns around my concerns around the fee in lieu is I was feeling there was a potential that it could isolate the affordable units potentially, right, rather than having them incorporated into other large developments.
That's a fair point.
And it just was trying, in terms of what we want, neighborhoods and kind of, integrate everybody together, right? We're all in this together. So it just kind of, I'm worried that may have been something that could happen.
I can't remember, but my memory from your bylaw is that these options were available, but that the payment in lieu had to be approved by the permitting board. Is that right?
Yes.
Correct.
So you can take it on you can look at each project on a case-by-case basis and go, yeah, in this case, it wouldn't really matter. I mean, a really great example, I think, is a single-family home development, like a condominium development with single-family homes. There's 7 units, there's one affordable house, and that poor person is, paying really often it's awkward. They might have a big house because the houses have to look exactly the same. If there's a condo fee, they might be paying a lower condo fee, which can cause tremendous resentment among their neighbors. So, I think maybe in that case, you'd say, just give me the money, we'll do something better with that. In a multifamily development, I think, in a rental type situation, my personal feeling is you're absolutely right. Just make them build the affordable units.
Okay. All right, but
this is all just my opinion. I mean,
which
no science behind this. Right.
We have a lot more experience, right? So that was what I'm talking about, is just kind of a concern. Not that I've seen or have any evidence of that. It was just something that when I was hearing about the in lieu of, I worried could be a potential. But it sounds like, from what you're saying, more empowers the town to do the right thing around affordable housing as well. Okay, that was my main questions, Eaton. So I'm
Great.
all
Thank
set.
you, Kelly. Peter?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Good discussion.
Yes. All right. Anybody have anything else? Okay. So I think that was very helpful. We appreciate your time and expertise and help in this in going through this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good luck with your continued conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay. And Dan, thank you for your work on that as well.
No problem.
Okay. Watershed plan update?
Yep. Back to me.
Back to Dan.
All right, folks.
So Dan, I'm sharing the presentation.
Okay. Great. All right, 1 second. All right. Thanks, everyone. I don't remember if everyone was there, but a few months back, I gave an update on the watershed plan, and we are most of the way through it at this point. Should be done by the end of October, and yeah, let's get through this. So just some background, North Andover had a watershed plan completed in 1987, which was initiated by a Giardia outbreak. This resulted in a bunch of major moves forward by the town and investment in watershed protection. The watershed treatment plant was built following that. And the master plan from 2018 points to the watershed as a very critical resource for protection in the town, and essentially pointed to things that we need to be doing to protect the watershed, and this plan is going to help facilitate that. So in November 2020, we contracted with Weston and Sampson for a watershed plan that would do a gap analysis, looking at what data we have and what data we need, policy audit determining where our sort of regulations stand based on best practices, what other people are doing. We've had some public meetings and done some outreach, and there was a field survey. They've been doing water testing. They modeled stormwater runoff and have put together education action management plans that will inform what we do with the watershed in the future. So to date, Weston and Sampson went through over 20 reports and extensive data from the town to understand our policies, history of the watershed, and conditions. They reviewed zoning and other town code like stormwater management and erosion control codes, and we're largely up to snuff with best management practices in relation to policy. There's a staff group of different departments that convenes monthly to talk about the plan that's sort of guided the direction of the plan, what's included in it. We've also had meetings with stakeholder groups of property owners and sort of environmental groups that have some interest in the watershed. And there was also a public meeting with another public meeting to come probably in October. We are in the process of doing sampling. The second of 3 rounds of sampling occurred at the end of August. And we're wrapping up the draft and just have essentially tying up loose ends, public meeting, finishing the plan, doing the final sampling round next. So major findings, as I mentioned, our regulations are largely meet what they would consider to be best practices. Early on, Weston and Sampson did identify that there were inconsistencies in the water treatment plant's water quality data, specifically related to phosphorus, which is the nutrient of major concern in the lake. And that sort of affected how the rest of the plan was carried out, which I will talk about in a minute. But most of the policy was standard, and there weren't any glaring issues that they identified. As I mentioned, there was a public meeting. There's been stakeholder engagement. They surveyed the town, which we got, I think, almost 100 responses on, as well as polling people in our public meetings. So we found that, people have a strong understanding of what impacts the watershed, what pollutants there are, and not everyone, but a good amount of people understood whether or not they lived in the watershed. When it got to what actually needs to be done to protect the watershed, what can be done at home, what products in your house are impacting the watershed, people were a little less certain. And in the survey, almost everyone said, we want more information on this, whether it's emails from the town, PSAs, flyers, whatever. And so that's definitely something we're keeping in mind is, more engagement with people and information on the watershed. Yes, on to modeling. And so the water quality data that there were issues with would have been used to model stormwater runoff. Instead, they used a land-based model and also data based on visibility in the lake, which can be used to infer the amount of phosphorus in the lake. It's not as exact, but it did the trick. And the scope of work sought recommendations for what watershed-wide BMP best management practices, otherwise known as BMPs. So what watershed-wide infrastructural BMPs would be used based on what watershed stormwater runoff told us. Essentially, to make even a minor difference in the phosphorus entering the lake, this would have required infrastructure to be installed most of the way around Great Pond Road on the south, some of the east, and the north side of the lake, which was determined to be just financially infeasible for the benefit, which would have been 4 to 22% reductions in phosphorus, just from spending $9 to $19 million. That's just for installation. It would cost much more, not much more. It would cost much more additional funds to operate and maintain those. And so looking at this, we determined we'd like to take a more focused approach and are not intent on pursuing watershed-wide BMPs. Sorry about that. Next slide, Jean. Thank you. Watershed sampling started in July and is continuing, as I mentioned, in August, and they're going to go out again this month. Sampling was generally positive. 6 out of the 8 stations that they took samples from showed an improvement from 1986. All were within acceptable ranges. There was slight increases of phosphorus at Ray's Pond on the northeast corner of the lake and at Country Club Brook running through the country club. But these are, single samples, and we're going to learn more as we take more samples to determine whether or not this was just an instance in which phosphorus was higher than it would normally be. Next slide, Jean. So getting into recommendations, really, there were only a few small things related to policy. So in the Watershed Protection District, we use gross floor area as a threshold to determining what requires a special permit in the non-disturbance zone. It would make more sense to change that to footprint because that's what's really creating the impact, the impervious surface, not the actual gross floor area within a structure. So that's just a minor thing. Similarly, they said we may want to consider reducing land disturbance permit requirements depending on how heavily we want to regulate land disturbance in the watershed. Currently, it's at an acre. That would trigger the need for a special permit via land disturbance. Another thing they noted was we use salt in the watershed for de-icing. It's not ideal, and the water treatment plant doesn't frequently test for sodium in the water. It's at more intermittent, and so they, recommended a few different things we can do to reduce either the amount of salt or alternatives to using salt for de-icing in the watershed. And another thing is they recommended creating a land acquisition plan to look long-term at what land we could protect within the watershed. Next slide. As I mentioned, looking at a more focused stormwater infrastructure approach, they pointed to this area in the northeast corner near Ray's Pond as a optimal place for doing a sort of test run of a structural BMP. So this shows filter insert that you would put in a catch basin, and it basically just catches pollutants and essentially, Weston and Sampson pointed to this as an opportunity to monitor how this affects water quality of the water running in and coming out of it, to use that to better inform whether or not we would like to install more. Next slide. So water quality sampling, Weston and Sampson outlined sort of everything that they think the water treatment plant should be testing for, how frequently they should be testing for it, and what the significance is. For the most part, the water treatment plant was checking all of those boxes. This is just a clear outline from experts on what they believe the water treatment plant should be doing to best monitor water quality to ensure going forward, or that data is reliable. Weston and Sampson recommended audits of water quality once a year and staff trainings, and also developing a water quality assurance plan. Education and engagement. So as I mentioned, what we heard is people are concerned about the watershed and want more information. So Weston and Sampson developed an education plan which outlines ways we can engage the public and what else we could be doing to better educate people. And so they mentioned things like incorporating watershed management and Lake Kachikowick information in like school curriculums, adding more signage on trails, both to provide information about the lake, but also to discourage behaviors like leaving pet waste on trails and things like that. And just in general, emphasizing more outreach to residents through town channels like email and social media. Next slide. And almost lastly, monitoring. So in addition to how the lake should be monitored via water quality sampling, Weston and Sampson recommends sort of pulling together a group of stakeholders to continue to provide oversight and recommendations on how the lake can be managed, which would be informed by things like annual water quality reports. And this is what they refer to as adaptive management, is getting this information each year and determining whether or not regulations are benefiting it, how they could be changed to better manage the lake, and just using this information in a sort of cycle to check on how we are managing the lake on a roughly yearly basis. And as I mentioned, a big part of that would be involving stakeholders and people with some relationship to regulatory boards, like the planning board. And next steps, we have the third round of sampling coming up, final public meeting, finalizing the watershed plan. Long-term things that are recommended in the plan to consider are third-party reviews of water quality once a year, seeking funding for implementation, which the watershed plan outlines different ways we can fund some of their recommendations. They have a few types of assessments of the lake that they would recommend at certain intervals. I think like every 3 and 5 years, depending on what type of study they're doing. And just organizing more coordinated lake management between stakeholders. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dan. So one question I had was, when we kind of started some of the discussion about the water and the sampling and stuff like that, one of the things we asked for was like actual raw data. I appreciate the overview. Is that something when the sampling's done that we'll be able to have and be presented to the board, like just the actual data more than as well?
Yep, so we're still kind of working with the water treatment plant for what would be an appropriate recommendation, but yes, a meaningful presentation of the sampling data, so bar graph, line graph, something that we can interpret easily on an annual basis or semi-annual, whatever that may be.
Hey, Peter, can you talk about this? Because I know you're very passionate about this, and it's frustrating we have not been able to get some of this info in the past.
Yeah, sure, John. Thanks, and thanks for asking that, Eitan. I think it may be related to one of the points that Dan had briefed on. I want to make sure it's not just semantics, but Dan, you had said that one of the recommendations is annual report on water quality. Did I hear that correctly?
So it said an annual report on water quality and separately an annual audit of
Right.
that report.
Right. So I think we need to be careful in response to these questions from John and Eitan that the report specifies annual report and audit on raw lake water quality because we already have annual reports on treated water, which is very important and I think a requirement of EPA and the state. And I think the recommendation, we need to be careful that it's specifying that in addition to the existing annual reports of treated water, we also need the annual report of raw lake water. And that goes to John and Eitan's question. We have to present that not just as a snapshot, oh, here's the phosphorus this year. That doesn't tell us anything. It has to be presented in a format where here's this year's report of the raw lake water in comparison to the last 5 years. And that's what we mean by a trend line. And that's what we have had great difficulty getting. It's not complicated and would really help us. And Dan, where I said raw lake water, it actually should be raw lake water and tributaries, because what this will tell the planning board is, oh, that Foamy Brook tributary draining this neighborhood is increasing in phosphorus over the last 3 of the last 5 years. What's going on in that neighborhood? And it's important for the planning board to know because that's the special permit authority for the watershed, of course. So John and Eitan, sorry to go on for so long, but does that address your question?
I think that's, I mean, and I think just that last point is important because I think sometimes we run into, well, why do you need to know this?
Yep.
And, and it cuts both ways, right? So if we're granting permits or waiving requirements in the watershed, someone wants to build a deck and they're asking for a waiver. Well, is this one of the places where the levels of phosphorus are going up? Or is it a place where they're going down that really could impact whether we waive a special permit or what conditions we put on a special permit and things like that. So that's why it's important for us to have that, and that's why I think Peter's been championing it, and we really appreciate that Dan, that you and Jean and are taking this up. We just want to make sure that when we get to the end, we get that useful data.
Yep. So I would say in the current draft, it's not explicit enough, in my opinion. So Dan and I just had this conversation this week to reach out to the consultant in the water treatment plant that we need it more specific at a certain interval, what the information is going to look like, and at a minimum, it be distributed to the Board of Health as well as the Planning Board. Other people may want that report, but at a minimum, annually, I think both of those boards should have it.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jean, for clarifying that. And Eitan, I couldn't agree with you more that we really need to include the explanation of why we're doing this. And to my mind, John says I've been animated or passionate or harping on this. I think you treated me kindly and said passionate, John. But part of the reason I have been is as we're assessing permit authority around the watershed, waiver or permit or whatever we do, we really have very few options for quantitative data upon which to base judgments. And the trend of water quality in the lake and the tributaries is one of those quantitative measures. And the frustrating thing is the town has it. We just haven't been able to get it. So Jean, I really appreciate your focus on making sure that the wording is correct, because once the report is done, it's done. And Eitan, I have 2 other points I wanted to mention for the board on this update on the report.
Great, thank you.
Actually, 3. One is that Dan and Jean, I think, have really done terrific work. I think it's probably fair that Dan has done a lot of this, and it has required a lot of interaction to, I think, keep this effort with the consultant on track. And I'm just really grateful. And I think we should recognize the work that both Dan and Jean have done, but it's terrific. So that was one of three. Two, one of the recommendations here, Dan mentioned pets, but in working with a lake study group prior to this consultant, and it included the trustees, among others, we thought we might actually have a very elegant, low impact solution to address not all of the pet waste, but potentially a good amount, and do it in a way that is not requiring heavy enforcement. We also had the animal control officer there, and it would be this. There's a lot of dog waste now from pets being walked from the parking lot on Pleasant Street. This is the parking lot right next to the Stevens Pond swim beach. And of course, Stevens Pond is outside the watershed, but they walk the pets from that parking lot down the causeway through the stone arch. And once they're past the stone arch, they're in the watershed. And what you see in observing those trails is it's very common for the dogs to relieve themselves in those first few hundred yards. So the dog waste is either going into the swim beach, which it's not the watershed, but it's still disgusting to go where families and kids are swimming, or the dog waste goes in right when they get to the watershed past the stone arch. And there's a lot of signage encouraging people to pick up your dog waste, but it's chronic. So the thought was this, and this will be in the report, to encourage with signage and education, and it won't be 100%, but to try to redirect dog walkers. If you're walking your dog, please don't park here at Pleasant Street. It's just 3/4 of a mile down the road to the new trustees parking lot on Stevens Street. You can still access the same trails, but park there if you're going to dog walk. And the reason is this, and this was kind of the elegant solution we thought. If the dogs are going to relieve themselves in the first 100, 200, 300 yards of walking, which is what we observe, if the dog walkers don't pick up the dog waste, it cannot flow into the lake because they haven't yet reached the demarcation point of where the watershed begins. So it really would be a good way to reduce dog waste going into the lake by trying to encourage dog walkers to use that parking lot. And the trustees were open to that. And then I have one final point, and that is Dan noted early in his summary that the consultant Weston and Sampson identified irregularities in one of the measures that has been part of the lake sampling by the water treatment plant since 1987. This was a key finding. It was really good work on the part of Weston and Sampson. And it appears that the issue was that it's not that they weren't sampling phosphorus, it's apparently as they were sampling, the use of the labeling of the phosphorus was not consistent or not accurate. And this means that it's very difficult or impossible to then use it for comparisons over time, because if it's not consistently labeled, you're not sure if you're comparing phosphorus apples to phosphorus apples or apples to oranges. So it makes the data less usable. And unfortunately, of all the things they sample, this is probably the key measure. So that's why they had to use this alternate technique. But what I would like to advise the board, I mean, I'm your representative on the group that is working for this watershed update. Based on our last monthly update, I walked away with the sense that we know there was a problem with the phosphorus data, but I am still not clear on what the problem was. So I would ask, if I can, on behalf of the planning board, that be clarified in the report with more precision. What was the problem with the phosphorus data? And Dan, I'm not faulting your summary, but you characterized it as irregularities. And by the way, I think you characterized it the way the consultant has described it, but we need something better than that. what was irregular. And here's why it's very important. The group that's working with the consultant said, look, this is bad, but there's a silver lining. And the silver lining is, let's use this observation to make sure that the sampling going forward is now done correctly. But we asked about that at the last monthly meeting, and my sense was that the response was just too ambiguous. And I'm starting to wonder if the reason it was ambiguous is because maybe it's not really clear what was wrong with the phosphorus data. So we really need clarity on this, and it will really be very unfortunate if we don't do that before this report is concluded, because this is the key measure and we can't use it. We need to know why so that we can absolutely correct that process going forward. Thank you. That's it. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay. All right, so let's go to Royal Crest Development. All right, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about the revised program summary, showing changes over time. We'll take board comments, questions about that. We'll talk about the building heights, master plan heights, and diagrams. We'll talk about perspectives, view shed corridors from abutting properties. We did get a couple of comments that I want to at least address or discuss when we're going to address those. And then I'd also like just to try to go around to members of the board to get a sense of kind of where you are after seeing all the data, seeing the heights, the density, locations of properties, and are you comfortable kind of starting to move towards the next steps? And I'll kind of go over what those next steps would be, or is there more information that you need before we move to those next steps? So that's going to be the plan for tonight. Jean, anything you need to add before we jump in?
Nope.
Okay. So I will go to the proponents to walk us through what we're going to talk about tonight.
Thank you, as always, for having us. We are here frequently, and we always appreciate it. So as you've mentioned, tonight we'll be going through 3 items. These are direct responses to requests of the board. So the first item is an expanded program summary. And as you can see in the packet, there is a lot of information on this. We wanted to be as comprehensive as possible and as responsive as possible to questions from the board about what's at Royal Crest today, what we originally proposed starting last year, but put forth before the board in January, and what we've most recently proposed in August. So this is all of that data compiled into a single place. There is a lot of it. I'm happy to go through it, but I'll defer to the board about how we should interact with this. We could answer questions. I could go through it. You can. I'll defer to.
So why don't
chair.
I walk us through what we have, and then kind of for each kind of square, we'll see if we have questions or comments. So why don't we do that? So let's talk about what do we have in this. So we're looking at Royal Crest comparison, existing Royal Crest estates, January 2021 and August 2021. So Mike, can you walk us through just what, not the actual numbers, but what are we looking at in this first square for building metrics, building footprint?
Yeah, so within this first section of the document, we're looking at the square footage, the existing square footage of the buildings that are there today, the square footage of the proposed buildings, and originally, and the square footage of the buildings as we have revised it more recently.
Okay, so for instance, the current square footage of multifamily, which is all that exists at Royal Crest, is 806,668 square feet.
That's correct.
Okay, and then we see the proposal, and we have breakdown, which is a total in January of about 2,200,000 square feet. The current proposal is 1,857,222 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
And you've broken that down in between the multifamily, the townhomes, the student housing, and then we have the retail, and then other square footage as well. Sorry, and so we have a total building square, I was looking at just the residential. We have a total building square footage for all without parking, about 2,175,000, with parking 2,700,000, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so this shows how that's changed over the different iterations of the plan as compared to today.
That is correct.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments just as to the square footage?
Yeah, just a question to make sure I'm following this. John, did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
So first, thank you for doing this and being thorough. But to follow up on Eitan's, if I wanted to look at what is the percent change of building square feet today compared to the current proposal, is that the 170% number?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. That takes into account the update on the plan.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the box to the right of that is just the change from January to August.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, my question is, relates to the townhouses. Up in the residential square foot section, it lists townhouses, and then down in other square foot, it lists townhouses again, albeit a much smaller number. What is that lower number?
That is a clubhouse amenity space, so we didn't carry that within the actual residential square footage. It's anticipated to be a standalone building.
Okay.
So we did take comments into account on that. We did reduce it in square footage in order to address some of the concerns that had been voiced about density.
And when you put, when office, that means office space that's being rented out, not offices for the residential buildings or anything like that.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And we can always come back if anyone has
Yep.
questions as we go. Okay, so residential unit mix, can you
Yeah, so-
walk us through that?
Yeah, so this one is pretty straightforward, but similar to the section above, this is specifically talking to the unit mix within each of the program elements. So just as the board can recall, the existing Royal Crest is all one type of housing. It is all multifamily, unrestricted rental housing. There are 588 units. This shows the program as it was proposed in January, and it shows as it is today. It also talks to the proposed student housing, the purpose-built student housing, as well as the boutique hotel. And then at the lowest portion of this section, it speaks to the affordable units specifically, and these are affordable with a capital A that are included within our proposal.
Okay.
So we are proposing 97 affordable units.
And
Eitan, go ahead.
well, I was
I have a
just gonna
question.
go ahead, Peter. I was just gonna try to get some clarification just on things, but do you want to ask your question first?
Please, in the first block, student housing is shown as 250, and then the block below student housing is 1,000 beds. Can you just help me understand what's the difference between student housing 250 and student housing 1,000 beds?
Yeah, so We are anticipating housing for 1,000 students in apartment-style dormitory units. Those would be 4 beds equivalent per unit. So that's just trying to compare apples to apples when we were looking
Yep.
at sort of the units.
Okay. They're 4 student suites,
That's correct.
250 of them for a total of 1,000 beds. Thank
That
you.
is correct.
Eitan, sorry.
Nope, that's perfect. So,
thank
just again, just for clarity, so right now at Royal Crest, there are 588 units. Down below, in the box below, we talk about bedrooms, because we did ask about that, and that's below. So
That
this
is
is
right.
just in terms of units. And then we see the changes in the number of units, so the current program is for 1,309 units, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. And so the change that we're looking at is 721 more units, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, all right. And which is down 20% from what was previously proposed in January?
Yes.
Okay. And you show us the different mixes. Currently, right now at Royal Crest, there are 0 40B eligible units, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I also do note it says 0 for student housing. That means that there's no official Merrimack housing there, but does not mean that there are no students that live there, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Do you know about how many, or I could ask Jeff Doggett from Merrimack, how many students currently live generally at Royal Crest?
Yeah, our estimation, working with Aimco and Merrimack, is between 800 and 900 students currently, either within units that are leased directly by Merrimack from Aimco, or in units that students lease directly by themselves.
Okay, and maybe so I actually do have some questions regarding Merrimack that we'll get to kind of later, and so maybe that can be something that we can get some, as best we can, actual physical numbers for, because if we're talking about there being 1,000-unit dorm, I think it would be helpful to know really how many more students that means, there.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Does anybody have questions about the residential unit mix? We'll go to bedrooms next.
Yep.
But just this middle box. Okay, so bedrooms. So right now, can you just go over the bottom box, Mike, please?
Yeah, so yes, this last section on this page is, enumerating the bedrooms existing and proposed, as well as the occupants. The next, it's actually the third page, gives a further breakdown about the units, but this is enumerating or showing the number of bedrooms. We know that is something that the board has been interested in the past. And it, again, within our proposal, just as a reminder, the existing Royal Crest is all family-style units. All of the 588 units that are there are 2- and 3-bedroom units.
So I'm going to look together. I think it's helpful for the board members. I'm looking at sheet 1 and sheet 3 now together. So
Yes.
currently Royal Crest has 588 units. 480 of them are 2-bedroom, and 108 of them are 3-bedroom.
That is correct.
Okay, and that gives us a total occupants of 1,926 people that live there.
That's correct.
Okay, and in the most recent proposal, we're talking, the proposal has 2,400 bedrooms, so a little over double, or I mean a little under double the bedrooms.
That's right.
And total occupants on site, 4,249 of what is being estimated.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and the proposal for, in terms of unit breakdown, is your proposal has 238 one-bedroom,
Yes, that's correct.
238 one-bedrooms, 188 two-beds, and only 13 three-bedrooms.
Yes, that's correct.
So the number of 2- and 3-bedroom units is going down significantly.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're introducing both.
That's I'm sorry, and that's just in the multi-rate market family.
That's right.
Not the 55 or the townhomes.
Yeah, but
Okay.
what you can see here is that we're introducing a more diverse set of housing options on the site, as well as introducing smaller units. It's more in line with the market today. as opposed to the market as it was 50 years ago when Royal Crest was first created.
Anyone have questions, comments about the bedroom? So obviously, I'm sorry, does anyone have any questions or comments?
I
Kelly?
do.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
On the occupants on site, I'm sorry, you said bedrooms. Can I skip down to occupants on site? Or are you?
Yep, bedrooms and occupants, yep.
Okay, so the occupants on site, just have a question. It's showing, as of now, the occupants on site, it's 1,926. And the increase between what's there now and the current plan is the 2,323 people. So that's roughly over 2,000 more people than today if we're just thinking about the difference.
Estimated, yes.
Estimated, right?
Yes. And that includes estimations for the office occupants.
And that was my question around the office. So the offices, I'm assuming these are people going to work how many ever times a week, doing their thing. So those and all the other areas are people who are sleeping there, whether they live there or staying in a hotel. I'm just wondering. It seems like we're leaving out. We included office occupants, or you included office occupants, but I'm just wondering: is there another significant number about other workers there in the retail space? And I'm just thinking, just because I see the office workers there, I'm wondering: is there another count for people who are working in the retail that we need to consider for traffic and things like that? Or is that captured somewhere else?
As far as traffic is concerned, that is captured. It isn't necessarily captured here. We didn't have a good estimate, I guess, like a metric to apply to that as far as the occupants, but it is captured within traffic trips.
Okay, so it's captured somewhere else. Okay,
That's
just
right.
that it seemed like those office number, that 248 is kind of of people who would be there working as a different number than occupants, people sleeping
Yes.
there. Okay,
Yes.
that was it.
Okay, thank you, great. Okay, want to go to page 2 then?
Sure. So similarly, this is set up exactly like the page previously, but this speaks more towards site-wide metrics. So this looks at and compares against the existing site square footage and some of the existing site metrics. So just as a reminder for the board, the site is very large. It's over 77 acres, which translates to 3.3 million square feet. But this speaks on the sort of upper pieces of this this chart. It is showing the site square footage as it relates to floor area ratio as it has changed over time. The next sort of section within this chart talks about site cover metrics. These are all translated into acres. So it talks about the buffer area as it exists today versus what we are proposing, for example. So this is an undisturbed buffer around the entire perimeter of the site. So today, there's approximately 12 acres of buffer area. In our current proposal, we are proposing 18.6 acres of undisturbed, unbuilt buffer area. So as you can recall, we've taken great care and effort to pull our buildings as far away from the perimeter property lines as possible to give as much space between our proposal and our community to the surrounding neighborhoods. So this speaks to the various different metrics as it relates to those things, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, and I see we also have metrics as to school-age children and financials. Now, just on those, I do want to talk about those, but to be clear, we have not yet had these peer-reviewed, correct, Jean? No. Okay, we had the initial metrics peer-reviewed. So, and these are based on the reductions in the plan, and I assume just percentage-wise reductions in the numbers, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we'll peer-review those, but
So ultimately, we'll get an updated fiscal impact analysis and school capacity analysis, which will have our peer review and review.
okay. But so what we're estimating here is that the currently there are 213 school-age children at Royal Crest, and based on the current proposal, that number goes down to approximately 188.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, we have vehicle trips. The number currently is 4,488 goes up to about 14,000.
Correct.
And when you say fiscal impact estimate, I take that's tax and other revenues minus costs of town services?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so currently, it's anywhere between negative $500,000 to $1.5 million based on how, based on how you calculate.
Yes.
And we would see a net benefit based on the current proposal. Again, needs to be finalized with the peer review between 2 and 4 million or so.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and this does not include any other development agreement that could potentially be reached outside of, this is just based on the tax data and the potential services, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have questions, comments? I know we went through that a little bit quickly, but about this chart.
Yeah.
John, go ahead.
I have a couple questions. They're actually related. You have columns, or rows, I should say, related to pervious area and open space. So if you look at the existing situation, pervious area is basically the same as open space. And again, I want to come back to how you measure it. But under the revised plan, there's more open space than there is pervious area.
Yes.
I'm scratching my head a little bit on that. That intuitively doesn't make sense to me. How can you have open space that's impervious?
Because we are introducing a number of hardscape areas, if you look further down, it speaks to that. So currently at Royal Crest, there's almost no sidewalks at all. So we're obviously introducing a lot of pedestrian, bicycling infrastructure, as well as some, public gathering spaces that are hardscape. So that's just trying to.
So you're counting sidewalks as open space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In
this particular measure.
Then how did you calculate open space? Like, you didn't just take everything that's on the perimeter and count that as open space. You're counting what? I mean, what are you counting as? If the buffer is only 18 acres, how do you end up with 45 acres of open space?
So it is essentially the unbuilt space.
Is the road count as open space?
I don't believe the road does, but I will
with
defer to our
respect,
engineers.
That's disingenuous. People believe open space is, open space, and it's not open space.
Understood.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I've got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, not a question, a point. And I just want to remind people, if you look at the daily vehicle trip total line, we had about 4,500, 4,488, and we're going to go to just under 14,000, 13,992, and it's a 212% increase. So I don't want to point out the obvious, but when you get percentages over 100, it's easy to misinterpret them. So it might appear that, oh, it's 200%, it's doubled, but 200% means it's tripled. Remember that if something is 100% increase, it means it's doubled. And if it's 200%, it means it's tripled. So, they're not doing anything wrong here. The percent change is correctly calculated, but we don't often use percent change when it's over 100%. We do. It's just people are not generally as accustomed to how you interpret that. That 212% means that the number of daily vehicle trips more than triples.
Correct.
I'm sorry to point out the obvious, but I just think we need to be careful that that's not misunderstood to mean doubled.
Well, yeah, no, it's a fair point, but it goes from 4,488 to 13,992, right?
Correct, and that's just over tripling.
Right, 3.1. Yep.
And the difference is 9,500
Yeah.
and, divided into the original 4,488, it is correct. It's 212%, but that doesn't mean doubled, it means tripled.
Okay, yep,
Thank you.
fair analysis. Okay, in terms of the data that we've requested, for everyone, does this hit what we've asked for? I mean, I think it does. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something. Peter, is there anything you saw that wasn't on the charts?
I have not. However, I would, if it's okay, and if she doesn't mind, I would like to ask Jean, because Jean was super helpful in putting together, or helping to guide, not putting together, helping to guide the initial program summary. And Jean, and so I'm actually now looking at, I think page 5, I guess, is the
program summary? Okay, so
Yeah,
we'll go to that. Yep.
have we lost anything off that from the earlier ones, Jean, or have we got everything, cumulatively shown?
Yeah, I think everything is shown, Peter. It's shown maybe in a different manner, but it's consolidated onto this one sheet. So
Okay, thank you.
So, right, if you look at, and so for anyone looking, we're on page 5. This is, says Royal Crest, August 2021 program summary. It has a square footage of all the proposed buildings, the number of units, the number of bedrooms, the number of occupants, the number of parking spaces. It also has the peak AM and PM trip totals, as well as the daily vehicle trip totals. So I think, we've asked for it a number of ways at different times, but I do think we have everything that we've asked for in terms of data in this chart.
it was certainly a cumulative effort. Each meeting, it was another thing requested, but I think they're all represented.
Okay. All right, so before we move on to heights, I think that was the next thing we were talking about. Is there anything in terms of the numbers and data that anyone wants to discuss, just as the data? Okay, why don't we go to the next topic then?
Okay.
And we can always circle back if someone comes up with something that they want to ask.
Okay. I have on my agenda the perspectives from the neighboring properties, but I'm happy to jump to.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, so I'll quickly walk through this, this presentation document. Hopefully, it is mostly self-explanatory, but on the first sheet after the cover, you'll see the current proposed master plan. We've included views from 5 different areas that we think are most representative of viewpoints that are of most concern to the board and to the public. So we've included viewpoints from 1 Berkeley Road, 57 Berkeley Road, 113 Berkeley Road, 53 Montero Way, and 5 Hillside Road.
Just a question about included views. Is there one from 114 or the bypass coming in so we can see the heights?
Not specific to this document. We do have other materials that show that, including the video that we showed at the
Yeah, I
last
saw the video,
meeting.
yeah.
These were specific to show sort of the viewpoints from neighbors as well as the sort of buffer area. But we're happy to submit still images or whatever, any sort of requested images from 114, we can provide that. So on the next page is something that was requested by the board as well. This shows, and it's a little complicated, but this shows the current proposed master plan overlaid the existing Royal Crest. So the dark line on the perimeter is the property line. The darker lines within this plan are the proposed buildings. The lighter gray lines you can see are the existing buildings. And you can see in many cases, the existing buildings are closer to the property line than the proposed. The gray sort of wedge-shaped lines correspond to the previous plan, and that shows where the viewpoints are from. So this is just a reference plan so people can see what the existing Royal Crest, if you go out to the site today, you can see the existing buildings, you can see, utilizing this plan, you can see that the proposed buildings will be further away than what you see today in most instances. So if you go to the next image, so these are representative images taken from those viewpoints, showing what you could potentially see of these proposed buildings. These buildings are built from a digital model, so it shows the exact heights as they are proposed. The red dotted line is the property line. So as a viewer, and you can see there's a key photo at the top of the page that shows the existing viewpoint, and these were taken last week. So these are the views that an occupant or a person standing in the backyard would see today. So the red line on the image at the bottom is the property line. The gray dotted line at the top is the existing tree line. So you can see, and then if you look at the key photograph at the top, the red dotted line is the height of the buildings on our property. So as you can see, the existing buffer area obscures the viewpoint or obscures the buildings as they would be built on our site.
So Mike, so this one is from 1 Berkeley Road. The smaller picture in the top of the page, how was that taken, or where was it taken?
That was taken from 1 Berkeley Road.
So
as
actually
well.
on the property?
Yes, correct.
Physical picture, like an actual, with
Yes.
a camera taking a picture?
Exactly, from the
Okay.
exact viewpoint, yes.
And obviously that's here during the summer with thicker trees, things like that. It's just current, correct?
It's current, that's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, this is not compelling at all. I don't think this shows much of anything. First of all, the scale of the building and the trees are off. I'm sorry, because what you're saying is the tree line is 2.5 times the size of the buildings. And if the buildings are 50 feet, that means all the trees are 125 feet. I find that hard to believe. But I think Eitan's point is the absolute compelling one, is that in wintertime, it's going to be completely different. And what you're saying is, oh, look, the trees are higher, therefore you're not going to see anything from the property. And that's not true. And when we did the property, the Binko property at the KSC, we went through very elaborate and detailed views. We did the same thing with Avalon. I don't think this is anywhere near as detailed. I don't think it shows much of anything. I can't conclude it. What do I conclude from this? That you can't see the thing and it'll be completely sheltered?
Yes.
Because I know that's not the case. That's just not going to happen, and you know it.
So that building is 390 feet from the property line. So
So I think one, we asked them to take the pictures now, so I mean, they're taking the pictures now. So I think the point about the fullness of the trees and is well taken, but the pictures are from now, so we can always supplement with pictures later on, but we can only get pictures of what
No,
we
that's
exist.
fine, but.
I think the point about, I don't think it's about the trees being that high, it's about the distance between the property and the trees.
That's right.
It's not that these trees are 120 feet, it's that it's 390 feet away. I think that's why it's done that way.
I don't know. I just don't know what I conclude from this. I mean, do I conclude that that's what the people who live in those houses will see, or they won't see anything? I'm reading it as an existing tree line. Look, it's way above the buildings, therefore you're not going to see anything. If this is what you're going to see, then, I mean, like Montero Way, because that one was closer.
Right. But
Is what you've got here what the person who lives in that house will actually see?
yes. And I would contend we did a balloon test on the site, and for those who went around the perimeter of the site, I mean, I will ask you if anyone could see anything from the perimeter of the site.
So like, let's talk about Montero Way. So let's go to 53 Montero Way. Could you show us where, actually, can we go back, before we look at the picture, could you show us where the view angle is? Okay, so what's there now are these are the proposed townhomes, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so what's there now is actually of a similar height to the townhomes and in a similar location, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, all right, so now let's go back to what we're looking at from Montero Way. So this is today, again, summer, early fall. What we're seeing from, this is an actual picture of what you see from Montero Way. Correct?
Yes.
So I mean, I guess to your
I'm
point.
having-
Good, Kelly?
I'm sorry, I'm having a very hard time understanding the other photo, the existing tree line. I'm getting caught up on how can the existing tree line be that much higher, even with perspective, than the
Because it's a perspective. The
buildings.
tree line is much closer to the viewer than the buildings. So the trees are much higher, they are perceived much higher because they're much closer to the viewer. They're at the edge of the backyards. The buildings are much further away. So the trees, as you are looking at them, and you can see in the photographs, are higher than the existing buildings.
Okay. So I guess the question is, John, to your point, is there a better way to figure out what someone would potentially see? I guess I'm not sure there is. I'm just trying to.
Well, I thought what we got for both Minko and Avalon were a lot better than this.
Yeah, I would agree with Avalon's. I felt
Yeah.
people didn't have to like what they saw, but you could at least know, standing in this yard, here's what you would see.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly and John, I agree with you. This is, and what I'm using as a comparison is the perspectives we've seen from other developments. This is not telling us anything.
Well, the difficulty is I'm just trying to remember what the distances were in the, like, right, with the Minco one, the distances were so much smaller that it was much easier to see and to do those pictures saying, okay, this is 50 feet away. What would it look like? Because you could actually see through it. Here, where something's 300 feet away, and the trees currently block it, it's more difficult to get that assessment. So I'm trying to think.
The Avalon project, there's very little buffer off the back decks
Right.
to the property.
So I understand. I totally, Peter, John, I totally understand why the concern of why it looks differently and why it doesn't. I'm just not sure based on the geometry. And listen, geometry was way my weak point in school. So I guess maybe some more.
But just it would be interesting to know from the property owners who know these views, right? Does this make sense to them? If they did this, is this the perspective that they need to feel comfortable that they're not going to see the buildings?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Like that would be great to have their feedback on these because they know what they see now. They know not where things will be, but they know the heights there and can kind of look at the plans and know how much higher, how much lower. That would be a useful piece of data if we knew from the abutters if this made sense. If
I mean,
these pictures made sense
that
to
could
them.
be something we could also. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea of kind of like an opposite site view of like going sometime in the late fall, early winter, and actually instead of going to the site, going to the abutting properties and taking a look,
Yeah.
and maybe even like having that drone again, and something like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
It might actually be because when I thought the site view was helpful for like seeing how the buildings compared to each other, but it might be actually good to look in. I mean, I agree.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of the balloons when I was outside, but
Yeah.
to do these view corridors kind of that way.
Yeah.
And that's been part of one of my constant questions around the views from the bypass in 114, right? That's where we're what 30 feet, 35 feet in some cases, and I think that's where we'll be able. We could certainly use maybe this method or some of the other methods and get a better feel.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kelly. I think we should have those perspectives on 114. Could I also ask a question about the view on 53 Montero Way?
Yep.
So if you look at the photos, on the two photos on the top of that, and you can see the red dotted lines, representing where the buildings would be. How high are those red lines off the lawn? Is that 8 feet, 10 feet off the lawn?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. Those red lines are not on the lawn. They're,
No. I understand that. Let me try to explain it better. Let's say that you went back out there with this photo and you had someone set up a plastic pipe in exactly the location of those imaginary red dotted lines. In other words, you stood where the photo's being taken.
Yep.
You had someone walk across the lawn, and then you had them set up a U-shaped plastic pipe, which was at exactly the height to superimpose over those imaginary red lines. How
Yep.
tall would the pipe be above the lawn?
So I've got our architect, one of our architects here, Jose Soliva from Elkis and Manfredi. Do you have that information?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. I think it's easier for me to explain the methodology of how we did this. So as you see, the plan.
But before you
Sure.
begin, and Eitan, I appreciate you telling us the weak point was geometry. It was not a weak point for me. I understand the notion of perspective. I understand we're looking at a line from the viewer's eye across the lawn to the top of the building.
Well,
and
Peter, it would
that's
help.
what the imaginary red line represents. So I fully understand the concept of perspective.
So, but I don't. So I think I'd ask you just to go through it.
Sure.
For me, even Peter, even if you got it, I think it would be helpful for
Sure.
for some of the rest of us.
Yeah, but thank you again. So for this particular view, so we had the view from the backyard at 53 Montero Way, which is approximately 300 feet from the closest house proposed. And from there, we have placed a camera in our model at that location in this particular view to match the photograph of the existing, and then taking the view, which is the large image you have below. We took an outline of that image and basically the horizon line, which is basically your vanishing point, and matched that over to the existing photos to locate those dotted lines on the existing photos. And then from that point, just a point of reference, we use the property line to indicate the tree heights, which we use at about 90 feet as an estimate that we did from Google Earth that gives us projections going how tall it is from the ground. And we cross-reference that with the balloon test, which is actually lower than this. So we know that was about 73 feet or so on the bigger side. And so that is our cross-reference, that about the 90 feet is somewhat average and conservative in our part. So all the lines that you see here is about 90 feet. So if you project that higher and get that thing, that would indicate how tall that line is, because that distance of that property line above that is hundreds of feet away from the proposed building, but a lot closer to the backyard and the view of the photograph.
Okay,
And
Eitan,
I'm
I need
trying
to ask
to-
this
it's-
question
Go
a
ahead.
different way.
Sure.
Okay? So is the photograph for 53 Montero Way, is the camera held to approximate the height of eye of a person standing in the backyard?
Yes.
Yes, so
Okay,
the standards,
now
yeah, go ahead.
follow my question here. So the camera taking the photo is approximately the height of eye of a person standing in the backyard, which I appreciate. That's the right way to do it. So I want you to draw an imaginary line from that person's eye to the top of the building.
Yep.
300 feet away. And at the top of the building, you said it would be what height?
Well, the top of this particular building is 39 feet.
Okay, now follow the line back. That line is sloped because the person's eye where the camera is what? 6 feet above the ground?
Correct.
And the person is looking up at the building,
Yes.
and 10 feet away from the person, that angled line is probably 6 feet 3 inches. 20 feet away from the person, the line's a little higher. When the line finally gets to the building, 300 feet away, it's the height of the building. And all I'm asking is that sloped line at the edge of the property where the dotted red lines are drawn on the photo, how high is that line there? As the site angle crosses the property line in this backyard, how high is that sight line?
Right, so it's gonna multiply, so 39 to be 300. Can't calculate that, so it's 300 feet away.
It's approximately 18 feet high. Because the property line is approximately halfway between the viewer and the building. The building's 39 feet, so, 19 feet.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. And that, as you can see, we've struggled because of the distances that we're talking about here. We've really made a very, very concerted effort to try to be as accurate as possible in these representations. We've had a site visit. We had the balloons along with drones. We wanted to try to give the board as well as the public as much information as possible. We will continue to do that, but these really are accurate.
Okay, Kelly, Alyssa, anyone else, anything further at the moment? Okay, let's continue. I want to continue to think about ways to kind of help that hit home and also
Yep.
deal with the winter issue.
Yep.
But I think some sort of actual visit to abutting properties or, pictures from neighbors, that they could submit of what it looks like now, things like that would be
So I'll
helpful.
dig out the ones from Princeton Properties, Minco, and Avalon and send them to you, and then we'll discuss what we think may work better.
Okay,
Do that.
okay, but yeah, I think we just have to, Princeton might be an interesting one. There are significant differences in the proposals. I think that's why it looks different.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, what's next?
All right, so we did want to get the board very accurate information as it relates to the building heights proposed. So in response to that, our team has put together a catalog of all of the proposed buildings that show them in axonometric projection, as well as various measurements from grade to the height levels of these buildings. So the first page that's included here is a plan, the proposed master plan, just for reference. The second page, which matches that plan, has overlaid on top of each of the buildings the height in stories and feet as proposed. To the right of that is a chart that shows, again, that same information, but in chart form. So, and it also shows how the buildings have changed in height over time from the original proposal that you saw, earlier this year versus the current. And then the images, as you flip through this, and I won't go through each and every one of them, but
Mike, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
'Cause I had a conversation with the man before the meeting, and I don't think it's self-evident here, but on this page with the chart, the 55-plus housing previously had been proposed over where C1 and C2 is. And now that those units have been reduced, so they were very close to the dorms, and I know some
Yes.
people had concern of that. So in the reduction master plan, the 55-plus housing is actually in building G1, so much further away from the dorms, closer to the office building and some of the multifamily.
that is correct.
Okay, thank you,
Can
Chief.
I also ask a clarification question? If we look at C2, it says on the diagram 4, 3, and in the chart, it repeats 4, 3. Does that mean that part of that building is 4 stories and part of it is 3?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
That,
Thank you.
sure.
And that happens a few other places, Peter, so one of the dorms is a 5 and a 4, if I remember right.
Right.
The back legs of the dorms, so
That's correct.
there's some other instances where that's the case.
And point out one of these buildings where the height of the building was reduced, so I can see how that's labeled.
Yeah, so for example, G1 was reduced. So it was originally 5 stories at 67 feet, 67.4 feet, and it was reduced to 4 stories at, I believe, 53 feet. This is yes, 53 feet. And that building actually was further reduced in its footprint as well. So that building got smaller both in height and footprint. And there's
Question.
other instances of that as well.
So question on the difference in heights of some of the buildings that have the same number of floors.
Yes.
So looking at the table again, looks like there's some 5-story buildings, or 5 buildings with 5 floors that are 79 feet in height, and there's others that are 66 feet in height.
That's correct. So the,
Okay,
So if you flip into the body of this document, you can see an illustration of that. So the taller buildings in height, so the 5-story buildings, for example, the taller buildings have pitched roofs. So you can see that in the axonometric projection drawings, that these have pitched roofs. We were making an effort to provide more contextual architecture for North Andover, so we were introducing some different sort of roofing typologies to the design.
okay, so if we're thinking about trying to compare the heights of the buildings, it's not even, we should not be concerned with the stories, but with the actual feet, because they're so different.
Yes, yes. So the lower height of a 5-story building that's listed here is a flat roofed building. So the difference is the pitched roof versus the flat roof. So they're both 5-story buildings, but the pitched roof 5-story building is taller because it's got, pitched roofing above that occupied 5th floor.
Yeah, so it's almost a whole story, a whole floor
Yes,
taller, almost.
yes.
So it's almost a comparative to be a 6th floor.
That's right.
So we did get we've had questions and a discussion in the past about, I think, John, you may have mentioned, some of these would be the tallest buildings in North Andover. So there was some kind of research done on that, correct, Jean?
Yep.
And the tallest building is about 70 feet, is that right?
So the Converse building, we contacted the owner, RCG. The Converse building measures 63 feet, not counting 2 corners of that building actually have some type of structure on top. We don't think it's an occupied piece, but with that structure, it gets closer to 73 feet. So the vast majority is 63 or 64 feet tall. The first floor has half the low grade, so that doesn't count in the height. Whether that's the tallest building in North Andover, I don't know, but that one always comes up when we talk about building heights.
So I guess the one question that I would have then for the proponents of this is, you telling us that, so it looks like the 3 tallest buildings are all along one, the three tallest buildings are D1, D2, F2, all along 114, correct?
That's correct.
And then after that, it's the hotel, which is kind of more set back towards the middle of the property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then everything else under that is under 70 feet, correct?
Yes.
So if seems like you're saying that those ones in the front, the D1, the D2, the F2, it's the architecture rather than the occupied space that puts those over 70 feet?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So would you have the capability of, if this board said, we really don't want anything over 70 feet, to make those, to adjust those to under 70 feet, those D1, D2, F2?
I'll defer to Jim to answer that question.
Okay, and so yeah, you can tell us what the considerations are there, what you could do, what you couldn't do. Yeah, let us know on that.
Good evening, nice to see everybody. My feeling about this is that we've been hearing a lot about the heights of buildings. We've done the drone test, we've done the balloons. And, you know, we are prepared at this point to make a commitment that there will not be a building over 70 feet. It means eliminating some of the architecture that we'd hoped to put on top of the building to, with gable ends and things like that, to give it more of a New England vernacular, but where 70 seems to be an important number, we're prepared to comply with that. Although I want to throw ourselves in the mercy of the court. Having made that statement, we really think the hotel is an important organizing structure in this. It's going to be a beautiful building. Thematically, it's going to bring everything together. It will also be surrounded by, you know, taller buildings or tall buildings around it. And having made the statement that we'll make a commitment, there won't be a building over 70 feet, I would like you to thoughtfully consider our request that there be an exception made in the case of the hotel, because it is going to be such an important building. It is going to be such a defining element to the entire site that it may be important to give us some flexibility on that matter. So we can commit to doing things, keeping everything under 70 feet, but would like to make a pitch to make an exception in the case of the hotel.
Mike, what's the distance from 114 to the hotel?
402 feet.
Okay. Further items that you want to kind of go over? Are there questions about heights that people have?
I have a comment, Eitan.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so we've given you some criticism about the sightline diagrams, so I also want to compliment you. From my perspective, the diagrams on page 18 through 38 are very helpful. And I don't like everything I see on those diagrams, but the way that you have done them is very helpful to me in terms of how I interpret what you're proposing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Credit to our architects.
Okay.
I just have a question. So
Yeah,
you said,
that's good.
okay, so not to have the buildings over 70 feet. So if we're looking at, say, D1, so are you eliminating the pitched roofs and just going with a flat roof? Is that what you're proposing?
If we were limited to 70 feet, we would have to eliminate the pitched roofs and have a flat roof, which we can make beautiful buildings. We are absolutely confident and comfortable in that, but we wouldn't be able to do the pitched roofs.
I guess I just have a question to my fellow board members. Is 70 feet the number that we're, the magic number?
So that was going to be my next. That was
Yeah.
going to be my next question, Kelly.
Yeah,
I mean.
I don't.
So that was going to be my next question to everybody. Do people have a magic number? Do people have a magic number of? I mean, I guess let's segue into that. So that's the question. The next question is, right? So we've heard from. I wanted to ask the question of the developers based on what they'd be willing to kind of do or concede, but the question now becomes to the board members are really in terms of, you know, us giving guidance to how this moves forward and us deciding how this moves forward, are we comfortable with the number of units, people, density, the density question, and then are we comfortable with the height question? So when we were talking, you know, when we had Avalon, a few of us were here, a few of us weren't here when we did the Avalon, but for some people, you know, the certain height or the certain stories were like, I will not approve of something that's over, you know, 4 stories or 3 stories. If it has 5 stories, I just couldn't do that. Are there magic numbers for people? So I guess that's really the question of the hour, Kelly, is do people have it? I mean, if there's a different number or there's no number, I think that's kind of what I'd like to hear from everyone. And we won't all have to agree on that, but I think it informs where we go next with this.
I have a comment on that.
Please.
I don't, just specifically on the height as it relates to the setbacks. I don't know if 70 is the magic number, and what I don't know is thinking of a 70-story building, 35 feet back from 114, we still don't have, I don't think we've got kind of sufficient viewpoints, and we're 35 feet back from 114. I think a 70-foot building there might not be my magic number, and I think I don't feel like I don't have what I need to be comfortable with that.
Okay, so what about the rest of, so you have a concern with the heights of the initial buildings, given the setbacks on 114, the D1, the D2?
And it's probably more this setback. I think it's the 34, 35 feet back, and those are the ones that I think I bring up every meeting, right?
Yep.
I think they move back 5 feet.
And again, one thing that we're going to have to consider is that each one of us as individuals may have certain parts of it that they don't like, and ultimately, I don't know that everything can be squared away, and then we'll have to vote on if the setbacks stay where they are you happy enough with the rest of the project to go forward or not? But your concern, as I'm understanding, is the setbacks on 114. Do you have concerns about the total numbers of people, of the building heights in general, other than those?
Mr. Chair, if I could,
Yeah.
just interject for 1 second. I
Yeah.
want to make one clarifying comment
Sure.
about the setbacks in
Yeah.
particular on 114.
Okay,
So the measurements as we gave you previously were to the property line. But the numbers to the curb line, to the actual street, are actually quite a bit wider. They're quite a bit larger than the 35 feet. So it's 35 feet from the face of the building to the property line, but from the building to the curb line is 51 feet. And then at the proposed garages, the setback is 73 feet. It's even wider at the proposed student dorm. It's approaching 70 feet on that one. I can give you the exact number.
Thank you for the clarification. I think one thing that will help me kind of quickly gauge that in my head, and I know when we did the site visit, there was the stakes. So, and now you've said I believe I saw that is it still 5 feet back with a new plan from where those stakes were?
Yes, and we've heard concerns consistently about the setbacks, and we've been making, as concerted an effort as we can to address that. At the proposed student dorm building, it's 64 feet from the proposed face of the building to the curb line.
So to clarify, Mike, when you're talking the curb line, you're taking into consideration some of Route 114's right of way.
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
Okay,
But that's
so-
from but that would be the setback from the street.
I understand, but as you know, we have some abutter comments about
Yes.
that, and for the board's consideration, I'm going to carry them to the next meeting because he brings up some certain concerns about taking advantage of that, not necessarily for your setback, but if the DOT was ever to change that curb.
Yeah.
line. So-
Of course,
So-
so,
of course.
okay, but Kelly, do you have concerns about, I guess, where we're talking about the density, the numbers of people?
I think the number of people, I mean, I think that the density, I'm more comfortable with the density. I do, and we've seen traffic, so the number of people and vehicle trips seems to be extensive, just based with everything on 114. So I think it's probably need to really look at the traffic studies to get comfortable with that again, and kind of what those wait times are going to be on 114. I think there's a lot happening here, and that the traffic on 114, I don't know if anyone else is seeing it getting worse and worse, just anecdotally, but so that's a concern. But we're also seeing the numbers that in terms of services load, while we have more people, overall occupants, we're decreasing the number of school children, which I know is a concern for a lot of people. So I think that's a benefit.
Okay. Okay, no, that's helpful. I mean, that's what I'm looking for in terms of how we move forward with this. So why don't I go to Peter next?
Thanks, Eitan. Could we start by going back to slide 10?
So I don't see slide numbers, Peter, so what is?
I'm
what are
sorry,
you
it's
considering?
it's page 10 of the presentation deck.
This one?
Wait a minute. It's the last slide before the first sightline photos. And on the bottom of this,
Maybe 9.
keep scrolling. Oh, that's it. No, that was it. Go back up.
Okay. I thought I counted right.
Right there. So on the bottom of that diagram, along Route 114, there are green numbers. Are those green numbers the setback? And is that from the curb or the property line? Because I see some that are 35 feet, one that's 56, two that's 56. And I'm trying to correlate those numbers with what you just
Yes.
told us verbally. Wow, where is the 60 and the 90?
Yeah, so those are to the property line.
Okay,
There's quite a bit of right-of-way. So we are preparing diagrams that we do plan to present to the board at the next meeting, showing all of the detail as it relates to, the curb line, the right-of-way to the property line, as well as there's a utility easement that exists in that area, which we will have information about as well. But these particular numbers on this plan are to the property line.
got it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So Eitan, I'm not comfortable with the heights or the density.
Okay. Fair enough. Alyssa?
Yeah, just making that, okay. So I'm thinking about the video that we watched last meeting. And I mean, honestly, as took us through the initial part of it up to the front, it almost felt, I'm with Kelly, like there was close to the road, and then to me it was like almost like a brick wall. I know there's some variance with the garage, but it was just very continual. And I trying to tie that in with, we had some discussion last time about the more modern architecture look versus the New England quaint town look, which brings me to, okay, the height of them, because I'm like, all right, that's pretty tall, that's pretty, but I think about the other commercial buildings on 114, and they do all have that pitched roof, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think if you're looking at like the quaint New England town, I think a pitched roof would almost fit in better, although I'm not thrilled about the height. I want this to look like it fits in North Andover, like we are a quaint New England town. I want that look without being overly, like that more commercial look that you see more in like maybe Somerville or those types of areas. I do have concerns about the traffic density. I think that's a big one. And I think with more studies going through that, that's kind of a holdback for me. I think if there was any other comments I had on there. I mean, I'm not, the density, the population of it, again, I think it's more the traffic than the people that I'm concerned with. I think that's kind of where I'm at right now.
John?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of riff on that idea of what do you see when you're looking into the property from coming up from 125 right on to 114 there. Because if you go through there today, this time of year, you can't even, for the 1,000-foot stretch of property, you can't even see a building. Now, again, like I've said, in the wintertime, you will be able to see a building, but you look at that and you basically see trees, virtually nothing but a tree cover. That will be replaced by close to 1,000-foot stretch of 4 and 5-story buildings. It's a 1,000-foot run of buildings that are larger than anything else we have in North Andover. And I think that's a stunning, extraordinary change to that area and to the town in general. There's nothing comes anywhere close to that anywhere in town. If this were proposed at the Amazon site, the Lucent site, if this were proposed up at Tuscan Village in Salem, it would be a good fit. But for a property that's on 3 sides, single-family residential, where you've got a 1,000-foot run of 5-story buildings and then continued rows of large buildings behind it, it's too dense, too urban, too much. I mean, I love the design. I think there's a lot of great work in it, but man, for that location, it's just too much. Sorry. Struggle with it, but that's where my head is. So,
Okay. So I guess I understand, John, your kind of visceral reaction to that. I know you've given it a lot of thought, definitely, and been involved in a lot of this. But it seems to me that for the most part, right now, most people, whether they live in town or just traveling through, when they go past Royal Crest, they go past and they drive by and they keep going. I don't see how that changes with what is proposed here. Now we can talk about the heights and the traffic. I think that's something that we need to kind of continue to go over and things like that. That actually affects everyone on a day-to-day basis. But if you're going to drive by, and yes, maybe you will see a different view, like for the 2 or 3 minutes you drive by, but then you're going to continue to go about your day. So I'm really more concerned. I have less concerns. I know Kelly and Alyssa have had some concerns, and you now mentioned concerns about what it looks like on 114. But I guess I don't really share those concerns because it's, for the most part, such a transitory location. So I do think about, okay, how will it impact the people in the surrounding neighborhoods? I think that's a much kind of more pressing and important question, and I feel confident that it's been answered, that the traffic data, that we'll talk about Merrimack College. I still have some questions on that, but I think those will be sufficiently answered. The traffic data, the school data, the financial data, all those seem to me to have been answered. So for me, I'm comfortable with the density. I'm comfortable with the look from the way the video was portrayed, and that this is a different type of proposal than anything in town, but I think it's okay. I think actually where it is proposed is a benefit, because you can have an isolated campus. You could have that, yes, I agree, at Lucent. But to me, 114, it's across, the people that are going to be looking at it are across from the college. So I haven't heard any complaints from them about what it would look like. We can ask them that, but I guess I just don't see it as affecting anywhere else in town other than for the positive, right? So this proposal has less school-age children. It has a better financial impact just based on the tax revenues. And then we have the potential of, separately, a development agreement. So we're talking about potentially millions of dollars for the town, a redeveloped area with more retail and stores and things like that the town could use. And then the impact, I guess I see it viscerally, but I don't really see it in practicality. I see it as if this were built and put up today and all the trees were up and everything, 10 years from now, what it would potentially look like. I think if you were going, you would drive past and say, oh, those are the buildings, I don't like those buildings, and you would keep going. I don't see how it would, impact the day-to-day life of anyone in town other than the people who live there or potentially the people that live nearby. I do see that, and that's why I want to study the traffic data and things like that, but I think we'll be satisfied, assuming we're satisfied with that. I don't have the issue with the heights, or, I'm come or go if you want it 77 versus 70, the architecture versus the being, the tallest buildings in town. I can live with either of those. So I guess that's where I'm at. But just
so, Eitan, can I comment on that, because
sure.
I appreciate your perspective there. I get the sense that a number of us admire parts of the design. I like the way John characterized this, that there are some intriguing aspects of the design that, if it were elsewhere, would fit. But it's not elsewhere, it's here. And so even though there are aspects of the design that we all may admire, at the end of the day, we are being asked to compromise. We are being asked to put something that's bigger and taller and closer than North Andover has, that most of us have concerns about. And at the end of the day, it's falling to us to compromise. And I just don't see it. I think it has a significant that Route 114 view shed will be a significant change in that part of the gateway experience to North Andover. You're no longer driving past a wooded section with a really attractive New England college campus. You're now driving past essentially a small version of a Manhattan city street canyon. It dramatically changes the view shed on the entry experience. And I really object to the notion that we have to compromise to allow this to fit into that spot. It doesn't fit.
So, a couple of points. One, I'm not really. I guess you said entry. Entry from where?
When you're coming up 114, I mean, I know that's not the property line for the town of North Andover, but I view that whole stretch of 114 as you are now, this is part of entering the town, and as you come up 114, you're going to turn off Johnson, or you're going to turn up 125. This is coming into the town, and I understand you can interpret it differently. You can say, no, you enter the town when you cross the town line. And I'm saying I view it differently.
Right,
You
but
come into the town, and eventually you find yourself on Main Street or the old Common, but this is part of that experience, and it dramatically changes. And I don't understand why we're being asked to compromise that.
Well, one, I'm not really sure how that's the entry to the town. I've never thought of it like that, and maybe that's a difference of how long people have lived here and what they expect. But I mean, if you're talking the actual entries to the town, I mean, from the other end is Lawrence, from the other end of 114, it's Middleton, miles away. So, I guess you could say from Andover.
But this is the entry to the town from 93.
From Boston, that's exactly how you
Yeah, this is how we get here from 93.
That's
So
been
for any,
referred to as
in
gateway.
non-COVID times, my family, our household goes by this 20 times a week, at least. Right?
Right.
So this is our entry into North Andover for
From-
anyone commuting into Boston, off 93. For anyone coming and working
93.
anywhere along 93, you come in off the Andover bypass
Oh, from the bypass.
and you come in right
Okay.
here. That's the
All right,
traffic.
from the bypass.
Right? It's all of us in the morning commute and the afternoon commute. You come in and you're going to be stuck in this additional traffic, and this is going to be your view. It's going to look like the mini Assembly Square.
Okay. So,
Right.
I was more just coming right up and down 114, so from the bypass. Okay. I guess, but to your point about compromise, Peter, is that you also have to consider, so what's there now, right? And also what could be there. And yes, living in reality, are you going to find a perfect project that everyone likes everything about? Or is this the better alternative to, one, what's there now, or I guess what could be there? If this proposal doesn't go through, what are the next steps? And I guess maybe we need some answers on that. What happens if this doesn't go through? Or, are there things that we could suggest to make it more appropriate? From what I hear from you, I guess I haven't heard something that we.
Let me give an example. Let me give an example, Eitan.
Yeah.
So, of where we are being asked to compromise, we're being told they'll make a commitment to no more than 70 feet, but they're then going to change the architectural details that we all recognize could help mitigate the effect of putting so much into this property. Okay, well, an alternative would be commit to no more than 70 feet by reducing a floor, and you still have the architectural details of the pitched roofs. But why are we being asked to compromise with that architectural detail rather than hearing the compromise, from the experts proposing this development, that they could also reduce below 70 feet by eliminating a floor on those buildings and still have pitched roofs?
But
And not only would that lower the height, it would retain the architectural details that they've told us are important, and we all agree that we like the architectural details. And further, it would also go an additional distance to dealing with the density. And one last comment about the traffic. We've all seen the traffic studies. Yesterday morning, I was coming up 125, and it was bumper to bumper stopped from north of Mass Ave all the way up 125 to the intersection with Route 14, all the way up past the Andover bypass. I mean, you can't even imagine how many light cycles you have to sit and wait to get through that. And we're now going to triple the number of cars in that area. There's things, that's another example of a compromise, Eitan. Why should we do that? There's other alternatives.
There are, I mean, there's a numerous amount of alternatives of ways that you could redesign and reconfigure, but it seems like there are trade-offs with all of those, right? So you say it decreases the density. I say I like the density because I think we need the housing. I think we need the housing numbers in terms of affordable housing. And I think the financials actually help the town. And, you know, there's a trade-off of, you know, if we had, let's just put it on the low end of another $2 or $3 million in tax revenue, is that better or worse than having a building that you don't necessarily like, 10 feet of? So you call it a compromise. I get that. I call it a trade-off. And I think that there are worthy trade-offs for having potentially more density, potentially taller buildings. Again, we talked about, taller buildings as a traffic calming. Now, if it's bumper to bumper, we're not going to need traffic calming, right? But I think there are trade-offs. And I get where everyone's coming from, but to me, I guess the data regarding traffic, the actual views is to me more important than some of the feel of it. But I guess I do understand where people are coming from. I guess I want to give more thought to, if it does change the feel of how you get into town, does that actually change the feel of the town? And that's what I guess I want everyone to think about, right? So if it's different for that 5 or 10 minutes that you're there and driving by, and you go to somewhere else in town, does that change how you feel about the town? And that's putting aside a really important part of, if you live around there, obviously this makes a much bigger difference. So, and that shouldn't be forgotten or left out.
But I think it's a little bit more than that, because this project, and again, I'm complimentary on the core design, and is completely different by an order, well, not a literal order of magnitude, but close to it, of anything else that's in town or anything close to it. It's so much bigger, so much denser, so much more urban than anything else we have in town. And it gets at, what do you think the character of the town is? What do you think the character of the community is? I mean, just because you drive by it and you're gone doesn't mean we care about that after all. I mean, that's why we have site plan reviews, so we get nice buildings everywhere, because, and if you make that argument here, you can make that anywhere. And what's to prevent, if we have a project like this here, what's to prevent a second one or a third one? I mean, you go down 114, and there's nothing, even 114 with all the density and everything that it has, there's nothing remotely similar in size to this anywhere on 114. I mean,
But there's nothing similar to Royal Crest either, what it is currently.
Of course there are.
Of that size and scale?
Garden apartments everywhere.
No, but-
Heritage Green, Village Green,
Okay.
I don't know the
Yeah,
total, but I would say it's probably comparable. But
Okay, so, but I guess here's my point, John, is that when you drive by Royal Crest now, other than that we've been talking about it for a year, do you think about it at all?
Well,
What
no,
the buildings
because
are-
the scale of it, my point is that it is an example where you can have multifamily at a scale and a proportion that's similar to the rest of the character of the community. Because in fact, You don't see the buildings today. There's lots of space between buildings. It doesn't come across as feeling super urban. I think that's probably the best thing about it. And again, I get it that the buildings are ready, not in good shape, and it doesn't have much more of a lifespan. We have to do something about it and so forth. But what we've come up with, while excellent for certain locations, I just don't think it's a fit for this location.
So I guess my next question would be, and what I'd like to, I guess, take up at the next meeting is, okay, so we definitely don't have a consensus on the board. There's a consent, I guess there are certain things that people like, certain things that people don't like. But obviously, we don't necessarily need a consensus either. We're 5 people who've been studying it, but, ultimately, it should be something that I would think that the town weighs in on, and has their say one way or the other. Whether we all love it, we all hate it, I think it needs to have its kind of day in court. But I think an important question, maybe for us, but more for everyone else, is, okay, let's say that this project doesn't happen. Well, what's next, right? If we agree that Royal Crest has passed its prime, and that the owners want to do something with it, and we've heard from Merrimack that they have a need for student housing, and that part of their plans is this potential dorm, what happens next? So, I mean, do people agree with that, disagree with that? I mean, is that?
I agree with that. I think that's something I've thought a lot about too, and that's why, I'm not a complete no on this, because what are the alternatives? Okay, we say no to this. There's always going to be something else that maybe we're not. Maybe there's some, that we're not happy with. But I also agree with Peter. How much are we willing to compromise on to make this fit? There's a line here, and it's like,
no,
how
there
far are
is,
we
and
willing
it's a
to go?
difficult choice. I mean, we're not. I think we're all sort of fairly astute people in business and understand if you don't go down one path, another path could be there, and it might not be as good as the one you're doing. So I think we're all making a balance. But I'll just point out one example. It's not meant to be, an absolute answer to it, but is, 4 or 5 years ago, we decided, or there was a proposal to put the largest weed manufacturing plant in the world in this location, and we're going to get tons of money, and this is going to be great, and we don't have any other choices, alternatives. Then 2 years later, Amazon fell in our lap. Now, is that going to happen here? Probably not. But the point ends up being is you don't always know what the options are.
And that's fair. And you shouldn't necessarily decide something just because, we never want to be like, okay, now if we don't get our way, we're going to build X, Y, and Z, right? That's not what I'm about. But I think these are also smart people that we're working with that going to have backup plans, right? They're not, so, I mean, I'd kind of like to get a sense of what those would be from Avalon and from Merrimack too. I mean, they're a big part of this. And I know we got some comments that came in asking for clarification on Merrimack's ownership and what would be there and things like that. So I think for the next meeting, what I'd like to hear from, if we can, from Aimco Trinity, okay, let's say this goes forward and goes to a town meeting and doesn't get approved. What's next for Royal Crest? What are the other options, or what options do you have to, you've heard about some of the concerns about heights and density. Really, what do you have that you could, what are other options do we have? And then from Merrimack, if this dorm didn't get built as part of this, or, well, one, what is the plan as part of the proposal here? Ownership, building, timelines, things like that, what it would look like, who would manage it, where all the students would be, how many students there are now, how many students are going into this potential dorm. So I'd like to hear that. And then, okay, if this dorm doesn't get built, we've heard one about the need for housing, so what are the plans? And we've also heard questions about, is Merrimack going to buy or use any of the other property here? So just thoughts on that to the extent that we could get them, I think would be helpful. Anything else that people have questions about that? I mean, if there are other public questions or comments, I'm definitely happy to hear those, but anything else that anybody's thinking about in terms of those two topics of what alternatives are out there?
So I
Not
would
so much-
suggest that the other abutter comment, which came in from John Waters and is specific to the Route 114 curb line.
Yep.
And again, given tonight's conversation, I think we should clarify, although we get some advantage for the setback using that, that could lead to unintended consequences too. And that being said, what we had targeted for the next meeting discussion had been the parking space ratios, the roadway design, sidewalk design, the images of that, so.
Yes, so
If
that-
you think
that-
we can handle that as well, then
Yep.
that was what I would suggest.
Eton, I do have one question, and whether it's tonight or a different time or something faster, but I didn't realize, shame on me, I didn't realize until the last meeting and watching the video that there's retail right on 114. So I'd just be interested in knowing how much retail could there be in those buildings right along 114?
So the
Do you want to talk about that now, Mike? Just what's proposed?
Yeah, we can, absolutely.
Yes, the program summary.
Yeah,
details
the
the
program
switch.
summary does speak to that. So, let me see. So yeah, so there is proposed to be 28,000 square feet of retail in, let me pull my plan up here. In building D1. So some of that retail square footage would front 114, not all of it, because, we want to activate this public, what we're calling, town square, town green. But the corner of building D1 would be a small boutique grocery store, for example. That's what it's envisioned to be, so 28,000 square feet. There would also be some retail proposed within the, or non-residential space proposed within the student housing building. So that would potentially have some frontage onto 114, sort of activate that corner, if you will.
Okay. So it's just so it would be D1, so it would be limited to what we saw, for the most conceptually,
Yes.
what we saw in the video, that it would be that corner grocery
Yes,
store
yes.
on D1, not, so it wouldn't be continuing down into D2 or F2.
That's
Or
correct.
F1 or
That's
H1.
correct. We wanted to keep the
Okay.
retail sort of focused around the town green area of the plan to sort of, provide some life, some activity to that while also having that public space.
Okay, so it'd be there and then in the SHA
That's right.
building.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay, anything from anybody else? All right. Gene, anything else on that? Okay, so when's our next meeting?
September 21st.
Okay, so we'll take it up, and if we could, maybe we'll start with those kind of questions we raised at the end and go through with the roadway and design and all that kind of stuff.
Okay,
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
all right, thank you guys. All right. Could we get approval of the August 17th? So could I get a motion to approve the August 17th, 2021 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Could we get a second?
Second.
All in favor? Peter,
Aye.
Kelly.
I wasn't at the meeting, do
Okay,
I?
I'll skip you. Alyssa?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Anything before we adjourn? Could we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Peter?
Aye.
Kelly?
I
Alyssa?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
And no comments have